Hello everyone, I am your storyteller today, here to guide you through a tale that is as much about shadows as it is about what lingers beneath them. I know many of you seek comfort in these stories as you drift towards sleep. So before we begin, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. And if you don't mind, tell me where you're watching from and what hour this story finds you. There's something intimate about sharing these moments together. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and breathe deeply. Let the quiet envelop you. The Hartwell building breathed with a slow, aching pulse in the darkness. Its century-old bones creaked, sighed, and whispered secrets that were meant to remain buried beneath layers of crumbling mortar and peeling paint. This was a place where time didn't just pass, it lingered, clung, and sometimes, clawed back. Every night, without fail, the haunting began at 3:33 a.m., the witching hour for this forsaken relic. Footsteps. Not haphazard, but deliberate, measured, and impossibly hollow. They echoed from a floor sealed off for over 10 years, as if someone, or something, still walked there, trapped in a loop of eternal torment. I should have known better than to rent an apartment in this building. The price was suspiciously low for downtown. The landlord was too eager, his smile forced, eyes darting with concealed motives as he shook my hand and pocketed my deposit. After my divorce, my standards had slipped as low as my bank account. The faded elegance of the historic district seemed like the perfect fresh start, a chance to rebuild from ashes. Kowalski, the building manager, was a man etched with time's cruelty. Nicotine-stained fingers, permanently bloodshot eyes, and a voice that rasped like dry leaves underfoot. He gave me the tour mechanically, as if the building's dark past was a burden he'd long wished to forget. He told me about the building's construction in 1887, its renovations in the 70s and 90s that preserved its vintage charm. What he did not mention was the oppressive weight that pressed down from above, like unseen hands choking the very air. Nor did he speak of the way the hallway lights flickered whenever the wind clawed at the broken windows. My apartment was on the second floor, a cavernous space with high ceilings and original hardwood floors that groaned beneath each step, as though the building itself mourned. The windows faced east, welcoming the hesitant morning light that made the dust motes swirl like restless phantoms in the stale air. I barely unpacked, too drained from the emotional wreckage of my past to care much for home decor, just a mattress on the floor, a small table, 2 chairs, and a few kitchen essentials. The first week passed with deceptive calm. My days blurred, office work downtown, diner meals, nights reading until my eyes gave out. The building was mostly quiet, home to older tenants who kept to themselves. Mrs. Chen from 2B shuffled past my door in slippers, her muted television sometimes humming through the thin walls. Across the hall, a man worked nights, his door slammed shut just as I poured my morning coffee. Then came the footsteps. It was the second week, a night suspended between sleep and wakefulness. I lay in bed when the silence was shattered, steady, cold footsteps echoing directly above my bedroom ceiling. My eyes snapped open, heart thundering violently in my chest. The clock's red digits burned into the darkness, 3:33 a.m. 7 minutes. That was how long they lasted. 7 torturous minutes I counted with every fiber tense, my breath shallow, muscles rigid. These were no mere rodents or settling pipes. The sound was human, precise, weighted, inescapable. It was as if something old and unforgiving paced back and forth in a torment that transcended time. When the footsteps stopped, an eerie silence descended, heavier than the noise, a void swallowing all light and hope. I lay awake until dawn, haunted by the phantom rhythm, the building's creaks and distant groans insufficient to soothe my dread. The next morning, I confronted Kowalski, finding him replacing a burnt-out bulb in the hallway. His face darkened when I recounted the night's horrors. He confirmed the 3rd floor had been condemned for structural damage years ago, sealed tight by the city's order. The owner refused costly repairs. No one lived there, he insisted. Probably just pipes or mice, he offered. But mice don't walk with such merciless purpose. That night, the footsteps returned. Same time, same cadence, 7 minutes of cold dread that rooted me to the bed. But this was just the beginning. In the days that followed, strange things unfolded. Windows rattled violently on windless nights. Faint whispers drifted beneath my door. The air grew thick, suffocating, as if the building exhaled sorrow. And sometimes, just sometimes, I caught the glimpse of a shadow moving silently beyond the hallway's flickering light. The Hartwell Building's haunted pulse was awakening, dragging me into a story darker than I could ever have imagined. Stay with me as I uncover the secrets buried in its walls, the tragic history that still claws for release, and the chilling truth that those footsteps may never stop. This time, I forced myself upright, legs trembling like fragile branches caught in a storm. Barefoot, I shuffled across the creaking floorboards to the window, pressing my face against the cold glass as if it could shield me from what I feared. I craned my neck, straining to peer into the murky windows of the floor above. The third floor lay in darkness. Some windows were boarded up with rotting wood, others coated in layers of grime so thick that even the faintest light couldn't penetrate. It was as if the glass itself was painted black, swallowing whatever might lurk behind. No flickers danced across their surfaces. No shadows slithered behind the filth. Yet the footsteps persisted, slow, measured, impossible. They marched directly overhead, pacing back and forth in a cruel rhythm across rooms that should have been condemned, empty, forgotten. By the fourth night, my nerves had frayed to the edge of breaking. I clung to coffee like a lifeline, gulping it late into the night, desperate to stave off the deep darkness of sleep where vulnerability awaited. Fear wound tightly around my chest. The thought of lying still, defenseless in the blackness beneath those steps, was unbearable. My hands shook constantly now. A twitch in my left eye had set in, small and persistent, twisting my reflection into a stranger's gaze. I sought out Kowalski, the building's superintendent, with growing desperation. But his patience had run thin. Each question I asked was met with irritation, then cold dismissal. When I pressed for permission to explore the forbidden third floor, his demeanor shifted sharply. His eyes hardened, and he muttered something about insurance liabilities before turning away without a word, leaving my questions hanging like ghosts in the stale lobby air. Sleep deprivation clawed at my mind. At work, I found myself blankly staring at my screen for minutes on end, lost to a fog of exhaustion and fear. Colleagues began to avoid me, wary of the haunted look in my eyes, or perhaps unsettled by the way I flinched at sudden sounds. Each day, as 3:30 a.m. approached, anxiety swelled inside me like a storm trapped in a bottle, ready to explode. Then, on the seventh night, something shifted. The footsteps began as always, but the pattern was different, no longer random pacing, but something deliberate, almost communicative. Back and forth, then a pause. 3 steps forward. 2 steps back. Another pause. It was as though the very floorboards were tapping out a message in a language lost to time. My skin prickled with a terrible certainty, whatever haunted that floor knew I was listening. The next morning, despite the fog of fear clouding my mind, I made a choice that would have seemed unthinkable just weeks before. I would find a way onto that third floor, with or without Kowalski's blessing. Old buildings had their secrets, forgotten doors hidden behind walls, service shafts lost to memory. Determined, I spent my lunch hour tracing the building's perimeter, seeking an entry point overlooked. Around the alley side, a rusted fire escape caught my eye, an iron skeleton climbing toward the darkness. Its rungs were scarred with time, some missing altogether. The metal groaned ominously as I gingerly tested it, but it seemed capable of bearing my weight. That night, armed with binoculars bought from a dusty pawn shop, I positioned myself at my bedroom window, heart pounding in sync with the clock. At exactly 3:33 a.m., as the footsteps began their ritual, I trained the lenses toward the third-floor windows. What I saw stole the breath from my lungs. There was light. Not the steady glow of an electric bulb, but a flickering, uneven flame, like candlelight struggling against shadows. The grimy windows cast shifting silhouettes that danced with an unnatural, malevolent grace. Then, in the window directly above my bedroom, a figure emerged. Human in shape, yes, but wrong. Too tall, too thin, limbs bending in ways that mocked nature's design. It stood motionless for a frozen moment, and I was gripped by a horrifying sensation, that unseen eyes bore down upon me, peering through the filthy glass. Then it moved. Its motion synced perfectly with the footsteps that had haunted my nights. Step. 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 Pause. Turn. Step. 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 Pause. The plastic binoculars slipped from my trembling hands, shattering against the floor with a crack that echoed like a gunshot through the silence. And just like that, the footsteps ceased. The silence that followed was worse than the footsteps themselves, an oppressive void pressing down on my chest, squeezing the air from my lungs. I sat frozen, staring at the shattered binoculars, shards glinting like fractured stars across the floorboards. My heartbeat thundered in my ears, a wild drum of fear and disbelief. Minutes stretched into eternity. Then, faintly, a whisper slid through the apartment, soft, a sibilant hiss almost lost beneath the creaks and groans of the old building. I held my breath. The whisper grew, forming words I could not understand, a language soaked in sorrow and rage, spoken from a time long buried beneath dust and silence. The shadows in the corners deepened, swirling with an unnatural motion, as if the darkness itself was alive, breathing, watching. I knew then, I was no longer alone. The next morning brought no relief. My skin crawled with unease, every glance upward haunted by the memory of that twisted figure. Kowalski's warnings echoed in my mind, though now his silence seemed ominous, a thin veil over truths he feared to speak. Determined, I returned to the fire escape that evening, the metal cold and rough beneath my gloves. Step by precarious step, I ascended into the blackness, the building groaning like a wounded beast beneath me. Reaching the third-floor landing, I paused, heart pounding as a chill like icy fingers traced down my spine. The door was old, paint peeling in long flakes, the wood swollen and cracked. My hand trembled as I reached for the handle. The moment I touched it, a cold gust swept through the corridor, an unseen breath that whispered through the cracks, carrying with it the faintest echo of those footsteps, distant and deliberate. Summoning every shred of courage, I pushed the door open. Inside, darkness swallowed me whole. My flashlight's beam trembled as it pierced the blackness, revealing peeling wallpaper mottled with damp stains, broken furniture draped in cobwebs, and floors thick with decades of dust. But beneath the decay, something stirred, a pulse, slow and rhythmic, like a heartbeat trapped beneath the floorboards. Then I heard it again, the footsteps. Soft now, but relentless, pacing just beyond the reach of light. And the air grew heavy with the scent of smoke and something fouler, like burnt flesh and forgotten memories. I stepped forward, every nerve screaming for flight, but driven by a need to understand. In the far corner, shadows shifted, and the temperature dropped until my breath fogged before me. Then, the walls seemed to pulse, breathing stories of agony and despair, stories etched in scars and whispered curses. And I realized, the Hartwell building was alive with the restless souls of its past. The air in that forsaken room felt thick, heavy as if saturated with centuries of sorrow and rage. My flashlight flickered uncertainly, casting long, jittering shadows that danced like wraiths upon the cracked walls. I swallowed hard, the metallic taste of fear rising in my throat. With hesitant steps, I moved deeper into the darkness, the floorboards groaning beneath my weight, echoing like distant thunder in the hollow silence. The footsteps, their ghostly rhythm, followed me, sometimes close, sometimes retreating, teasing the edge of my sanity. As I reached what once might have been a parlor, my beam caught a collection of faded photographs scattered across the floor, their glass cracked and faces blurred with time. I knelt, lifting one carefully. A family portrait, smiling faces frozen in sepia, but the eyes seemed impossibly hollow, black voids that sucked light and hope alike. Suddenly, a cold gust swept through the room, snuffing the flashlight's flame. Darkness engulfed me. Panic surged. I fumbled with the switch, desperate for light. When it returned, the room had changed. The door behind me slammed shut with a thunderous bang. A guttural whisper echoed around me, low and urgent, words dripping with desperation and fury. I spun toward the sound, heart racing, breath ragged. In the corner, where the shadows pooled deepest, a figure emerged. Not quite human, its form stretched and contorted, limbs bending unnaturally. Its face was a blur, a shifting mask of pain and malice. It moved with jerky, unnatural motions, each step accompanied by the sickening scrape of nails against wood. I stumbled back, terror rooting me to the spot as the creature's hollow eyes fixed on me with a hunger that was not of this world. Then, it spoke, not with words, but with a voice that clawed at my mind, weaving memories that were not mine. Images flooded my consciousness, a fire raging through the building decades ago, screams swallowed by smoke, trapped souls crying out for release. The footsteps, those endless, measured steps, were not random. They were the echo of that night's horror, a spectral loop of suffering and unrest. I realized then that the Hartwell building was more than haunted, it was a prison for those lost souls, bound by pain and forgotten justice. Summoning every ounce of will, I reached into my pocket and pulled out an old, worn photograph I had found earlier, an image of a young woman with sad eyes. I held it out. The creature recoiled, its form flickering like a dying flame. With a voice breaking through the chaos, I whispered, "I see you. I remember." The room shuddered, the oppressive weight lifting ever so slightly. And in that fragile moment of connection, I knew my journey into the Hartwell building's darkest secret was only beginning. The fragile moment of connection lingered, suspended like a delicate thread in the suffocating darkness. The apparition's contorted form trembled, flickering as if caught between worlds, torn between anguish and the faintest glimmer of release. My breath came in shallow gasps, the oppressive silence broken only by the distant, relentless ticking of a forgotten clock somewhere deep within the building's bones. Suddenly, a cold rush of air swept through the room, carrying with it whispers, dozens of voices, layered and indistinct, murmuring tales of betrayal, fire, and sorrow. The very walls seemed to pulse with the echoes of a tragedy long buried beneath years of neglect and silence. Driven by an instinct I couldn't explain, I reached out, fingers brushing against a dusty, charred ledger lying half-buried beneath debris. Its brittle pages bore names, dates, and a litany of grievances, stories of the building's original inhabitants, their joys and sufferings, and the terrible night when flames consumed hope and claimed lives. As I read, the footsteps resumed, not above this time, but all around me, an oppressive rhythm that filled the room and rattled my soul. The shadows danced and stretched, coalescing into fragmented visions, a firestorm engulfing the building, desperate cries for help swallowed by smoke, and figures trapped behind locked doors, their faces etched with fear. One name stood out, a woman named Eleanor Hartwell, the building's first owner's daughter. The ledger spoke of her mysterious disappearance the night of the fire, a secret never unearthed. Her grief-stricken father had sealed the third floor soon after, burying the truth and locking away the restless spirits. Suddenly, a whisper brushed my ear, a voice soft yet laden with sorrow, "Find her, free us." A chill ran down my spine as the weight of responsibility settled upon me. The restless footsteps were a call for justice, a plea for liberation from a past shrouded in darkness. I knew then that my survival, and perhaps my very soul, depended on uncovering the truth behind Eleanor's fate and breaking the chains that bound the Hartwell building's tormented spirits. With renewed resolve, I prepared to descend deeper into the heart of the mystery, where secrets whispered from the shadows and the past refused to rest. For a long moment, silence stretched between us, me, crouched by my window, and whatever lurked above, frozen in its midnight dance. Then, slowly, deliberately, the footsteps resumed. But this time, they shifted direction, moving purposefully toward the stairwell. My mind spun with worst-case scenarios. If it could come down, bypassing the sealed-off entrances to the third floor, then nowhere in the building was truly safe. Panic surged through me. I grabbed my keys and wallet with trembling fingers, not bothering to dress beyond the t-shirt and boxers I'd been sleeping in. The hallway outside my apartment was pitch black, the overhead lights had burned out weeks ago, swallowed by the building's neglect. Fumbling blindly, I found the stairwell door. My bare feet made no sound against the cold linoleum. Behind me, a new noise slithered through the building, not footsteps now, but a chilling, unnatural scratching, like fingernails scraping wood. I took the stairs 3 at a time, heart hammering so fiercely I was sure it would explode. At the ground floor, I burst through the exit and gulped the night air, gasping as though I'd been drowning. The street was deserted, flickering street lamps casting long, wavering shadows. I stood in my underwear, shivering in the chill, staring up at the Hartwell building. The third-floor windows were dark again, no trace of the flickering light I'd seen moments before. The rest of the night I spent in an all-night diner, nursing cup after cup of coffee, trying to piece together the fragments of what I'd experienced. By dawn, I nearly convinced myself it was a hallucination born of stress and sleep deprivation. Nearly. When I returned to the building later that day to collect my belongings, Kowalski was waiting in the lobby. His usually steady hands trembled as he lit a cigarette, his face was pale, drawn. He told me other tenants had reported strange noises, scratching in the walls, footsteps echoing in empty hallways, doors opening and closing on floors that should have remained sealed. Mrs. Chen had found her apartment door wide open one morning, though she swore she had locked it before bed. Most disturbingly, Kowalski himself had finally ventured upstairs, wielding a master key he claimed did not exist. The door to the third floor was unlocked. The heavy boards that once sealed it were stacked neatly aside, as though removed from within. Shining his flashlight down the abandoned hallway, he'd seen footprints, fresh prints hovering several inches above the dusty floor, as if whatever made them barely touched the ground. He resealed the door immediately, industrial adhesive, steel brackets, but we both knew it was futile. Whatever haunted that floor had escaped before, and it would again. I packed my few possessions in silence, hands still shaking from the previous night's ordeal. As I carried my last box to the car, I glanced up at the third-floor windows one final time. In daylight, they appeared ordinary, grimy glass reflecting the gray sky. But I knew that when night fell and the clock struck 3:33 a.m., the footsteps would return. Pacing those empty rooms, wearing grooves into floors that should have been untouched for a decade, leaving footprints that floated above dust long settled. I drove away without looking back. Yet even now, 3 months later, I still wake at 3:33 a.m. My new apartment is in a modern complex, ground floor. But sometimes, in the thin space between sleep and waking, I swear I hear those measured footsteps. Echoing from somewhere far above. Patient. Persistent. Waiting for me to return. Story 2. Something was wrong with the mirror, and that wrongness seeped into every corner of my life like water creeping through cracked foundations. The fluorescent lights hummed above the barber chair, their electric funeral dirge casting sickly yellow light across checkerboard linoleum stained by 40 years of hair and forgotten conversations. But now, when I looked into that familiar silver surface, where I'd watched myself age from 25 to 42, something looked back. Eyes that blinked a heartbeat too late. Each visit to the barber's chair became a descent into unease. The mirror's surface, once a faithful witness to the passage of years, now felt like a veil separating me from something just out of reach, a shadow lurking behind the glass, waiting to cross over. At first, it was subtle. A slight delay in my reflection's movements, as if the image lagged behind me by a fraction of a second. Then came the moments when my reflection's eyes didn't quite meet mine, flickering with a strange hesitation, a flicker of something unspoken. One afternoon, the barber was distracted by a phone call. As he turned away, I stared into the mirror, and for a fleeting heartbeat, my reflection smiled, a slow, cruel smile that did not belong to me. I recoiled, the chair's vinyl creaking under my sudden movement. The reflection returned to normal, innocent and blank, as if nothing had happened. But I knew better. That night, sleep eluded me. In the dark, the room seemed to pulse with silent whispers. I caught glimpses of movement in the corners of my vision, shadows that vanished when I turned. Haunted by a growing sense of dread, I began researching the barber shop's history. It had stood for decades, a fixture in the neighborhood. But decades ago, a tragedy had stained its walls. A young man, whose reflection in the mirror had been his closest companion, vanished without a trace. The shop was said to harbor a restless presence, trapped between worlds. Compelled by a mixture of fear and fascination, I returned to the shop the next day, determined to confront whatever lingered in the glass. As the fluorescent lights hummed overhead, I sat once more in the chair, eyes locked on my reflection. The room seemed to hold its breath. Then, slowly, the reflection's lips parted, and it whispered my name. A chill coursed through me. The mirror was no longer a passive surface. It was a portal. And something was reaching through. The mirror's surface rippled like water disturbed by a gentle breeze, and for a fleeting moment, I felt as though I could see beyond it, into a world that was both familiar and terrifyingly alien. The whispered repetition of my name echoed softly, each syllable a thread pulling me closer to the edge of something unspeakable. My hands trembled as I reached out, fingertips hovering just above the cold glass. The reflection's eyes locked with mine, not with recognition, but with a silent plea, a warning encoded in the depths of that haunted gaze. Suddenly, the barber's chair shifted beneath me, as if gripped by an unseen force. The hum of the fluorescent lights crescendoed into a piercing drone, and shadows began to twist and writhe along the walls, creeping inward like living things. Panic surged. I tore my gaze away, but the room refused to release me from its grip. The mirror pulsed, alive with a dark energy that seemed to bleed into the very air I breathed. In that moment, I understood, the mirror did not merely reflect reality, it trapped fragments of souls, memories, and fears, weaving them into a tapestry of torment. As the door creaked open behind me, I spun around to see the barber's eyes, wide with terror, locked on something invisible to me but all too real to him. "Don't look back," he whispered, voice trembling. "Some reflections are meant to stay hidden." I fled the shop that day, leaving behind the buzzing lights and the sinister mirror. But its presence followed me, a shadow lurking in every reflective surface, a silent observer waiting to reclaim what was lost. Even now, when I catch my reflection in a window or a polished blade, I wonder, who, or what, is truly staring back. Days turned into restless nights, each moment haunted by the mirror's lingering presence. No reflective surface felt safe, windows, polished spoons, even the glossy screen of my phone betrayed flickers of that distorted gaze, that silent plea. I tried to shrug it off as fatigue, the mind's trickery after months of unrest. But deep down, I knew something had crossed into my life, tethered to me by the fragile thread of that cursed reflection. One evening, compelled by a mixture of dread and determination, I returned to the barber shop. The fluorescent lights hummed their unsettling dirge, flickering in mournful rhythm. The mirror hung silently on the wall, its surface dark and still as a pond at midnight. I reached out, fingertips brushing the glass. A chill shot through me, like cold breath from another realm. Then, from the depths of that glassy abyss, a hand emerged. Pale, translucent, fingers curling toward me with a yearning desperation. My heart thundered. I stumbled back, breath ragged, eyes wide with terror. The barber stepped forward, his face grave. "This mirror," he said quietly, "has trapped more than reflections. It's a prison for souls caught between light and shadow." He told me stories of those who'd gazed too long, who'd vanished without trace, swallowed by their own reflections. I realized then, I was entangled in a nightmare far older than myself, and the mirror's grasp would not loosen until I found a way to sever its hold. But how do you fight something that dwells in the spaces where reality dissolves? Night had settled thick and heavy over the city as I returned once more to the barber shop, clutching an old, leather-bound book I discovered in a forgotten corner of the library, a tome of ancient rites and forgotten lore. The pages whispered of mirrors as gateways, prisons for spirits, and rituals to sever their hold. Inside the shop, the fluorescent hum buzzed low, a mournful dirge that filled the stale air. The mirror awaited, silent and still, its surface darker than ever, as if absorbing the dim light around it. I approached cautiously, heart pounding with a mixture of fear and resolve. Following the book's instructions, I traced arcane symbols along the mirror's edges with trembling fingers, whispering words older than the city itself. Suddenly, the glass trembled, rippling like a disturbed pond. From its depths, a face emerged, twisted, sorrowful, pleading. It was my reflection, and yet, it was not. The eyes that stared back were voids of darkness, flickering with trapped memories and untold anguish. A chilling voice echoed from the depths, a whisper that scraped against my soul, "Release us." The air thickened, shadows deepened, and the shop seemed to pulse with a life of its own. The battle had begun, a desperate struggle between light and darkness, self and shadow, freedom and eternal captivity. I knew then that to break the mirror's curse, I would have to confront not just the entity within, but the darkest parts of myself. As the veil between worlds thinned, I steeled myself to face the unknown, because some reflections demand a price only the brave dare pay. It all began 3 weeks ago on a Tuesday morning, heavy with the kind of suffocating humidity that made my shirt cling to my back before I'd even broken a sweat. I was setting up my station for the day's first customer when, as I reached for the disinfectant spray, I caught sight of myself in the mirror. My hand moved instinctively, but my reflection's hand hesitated, just for a fraction, maybe half a second, before following. The bottle slipped from my grasp, clattering sharply against the marble counter, blue droplets splattering in slow motion. My heart stuttered, a small, unnatural skip, the kind you feel when missing a step going downstairs. I stared at my reflection, waiting for it to mirror my confusion, but it lagged, wearing a blank stare while my own face twisted with bewilderment. Exhaustion. That's what I told myself. Running a one-man barber shop meant 12-hour days, muscles aching deep into the bones, eyes gritty with fatigue. Everyone knows how the mind plays tricks when you're that tired. But the seed of unease had been planted. And seeds grow in the dark corners of your mind, especially when you water them with attention. By the end of that first week, the delay had stretched to nearly 2 seconds. I'd scratch my beard, and my reflection would mimic the motion moments later, like an actor who'd missed his cue. Customers never noticed. Their glances were casual, unfocused, unlike mine, which burned with obsessive intensity. Sleep became a stranger. I lay in the narrow bed above the shop, the building settling around me in a symphony of creaks and sighs. The air conditioning unit outside wheezed mechanically, but sometimes I swore I heard something else, breathing, a whisper not quite human. During the second week, I started timing the delay with a stopwatch. It was now consistent, exactly 4 seconds. When I raised my hand, my reflection followed precisely 4 seconds later. When I turned my head, it mirrored the motion with mathematical precision. But then came the moments that made my mouth dry and palms slick with sweat. Sometimes, in that 4-second gap, my reflection did things I hadn't done. The first time I noticed, I was cleaning my straight razor after finishing with old Mr. Henderson, who came every Thursday for the same crew cut he'd been getting since Eisenhower was president. I wiped the blade methodically when, out of the corner of my eye, I saw my reflection hold the razor differently, not wiping, but holding it up to the light, inspecting the edge with a cold intensity that sent shivers down my spine. Frozen, I watched as the reflection slowly, deliberately brought the blade closer to its throat, not close enough to cut, but near enough that the steel gleamed ominously against the pale skin. Then, as if snapping back to its role, it resumed wiping the blade perfectly in sync with me. The razor slipped from my fingers, crashing to the floor like shattering glass. My breath came in sharp, loud gasps, echoing through the empty shop. Mr. Henderson had left 20 minutes earlier. I was alone with only the fluorescent hum, and a chilling certainty. Something was terribly, impossibly wrong. I told myself it was a hallucination, stress manifesting in strange ways, but the explanation felt thin, a fragile veil against the cold pressing reality. By the third week, the delay had stretched to nearly 30 seconds. Half a minute passed between my action and the reflection's response. The 30-second delay was impossible to ignore. It wasn't just a lag anymore, it was a chasm. When I raised my hand, I'd watched the mirror hold still, untouched, for what felt like an eternity before finally mimicking the motion. Sometimes, it seemed like the reflection was watching me instead, waiting, calculating. That unsettling sense of being observed rather than mirrored gnawed at me. My days blurred into a fog of exhaustion and dread. Customers noticed my distracted eyes, my hesitations during cuts. Whispers started, concern masked as curiosity, about the haunted look I wore like a second skin. But I couldn't explain. How do you tell people that your own reflection has become a stranger? That it moves on its own time, not yours? One evening, I caught the reflection blinking, just once, just after I blinked, but the delay stretched until I could see it linger, almost reluctant. It was a cruel mimicry of life. I started keeping a journal, desperately trying to record every anomaly. The reflection sometimes smiled, slow, deliberate, a smile that didn't reach its eyes. Other times, it gestured, subtly, fingers twitching in a way I never had. Once, it reached toward the glass, as if trying to break free, and for a moment, I thought I heard a whisper, a voice cracked with sorrow, barely audible but unmistakably real. The mirror became a trap, a prison not just for a reflection but for something else, something ancient and hungry. Sleep fled entirely. At night, I'd wake suddenly, heart racing, seeing glimpses of that smile lingering in the shadows. Mirrors in my new apartment, windows, even shiny spoons, they all betrayed me with distorted reflections that hinted at something lurking just beyond perception. Then, one night, the power went out. The shop was plunged into darkness. I fumbled for my phone, its weak glow illuminating the walls covered in faded photographs, trophies of a life unraveling. In the mirror, I saw movement, a figure stepping out slowly, deliberately. But it wasn't me. It was the reflection. And it was free. The moment the power died, silence swallowed the room whole. Darkness pressed against every surface, thick and suffocating. My phone's weak light flickered as I aimed it toward the mirror, heart pounding so fiercely I thought it might burst free from my chest. In the glass, the reflection moved with a fluidity I had never seen before. It stepped forward, not a delayed mimic, but independently. Its eyes gleamed with something ancient and hungry, a hollow void where recognition once lived. I stumbled back, breath caught in my throat. The reflection's lips curled into that same slow, cruel smile. It raised a hand, reaching out, its fingers barely grazing the glass surface. And then, the room was filled with a cold, whispering wind that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. The reflection's voice, a chilling hiss, echoed through the darkness. You watched, but never saw. Now you belong to the mirror. A sudden sharp pain struck my chest, and the world tilted. I fought to breathe, to stay anchored in reality, but the shadows around me deepened, pulling me toward the glass. My hands flew to the mirror, desperate to push away the cold, hard surface, but it was as if I was reaching into a void. The last thing I saw before darkness claimed me was that cruel smile, now inches from my own face. When I woke, I was lying on the cold floor of the barber shop, the power restored, fluorescent lights humming softly above. The mirror hung innocently on the wall, reflecting only my frightened eyes. But something had changed. I was no longer alone. Behind me in the glass, just out of the corner of my eye, a shadow lingered. Watching. Waiting. The air around me felt heavier, charged with a presence unseen but unmistakably close. I turned slowly, every nerve screaming, but there was nothing, only the empty room bathed in sterile fluorescent light. Yet the feeling persisted, like icy fingers tracing down my spine. Every time I glanced at the mirror afterward, I caught fleeting glimpses, shadows that flickered just beyond the edges of the glass, silhouettes that vanished when fully seen. The shop, once a sanctuary of routine, had become a stage for the unseen. Sleep was no refuge. Dreams twisted into nightmarish reflections, distorted versions of myself trapped in glass prisons, reaching out, begging for release or warning me of my own impending captivity. Friends and customers began to notice my withdrawal, my haunted eyes, the way I jumped at the slightest noise. I spoke less, listened more, to the whispers that seemed to emanate from every reflective surface. One night, driven by desperation and a flicker of hope, I returned to the library, poring over dusty tomes and forgotten lore. Legends spoke of mirrors as thresholds, portals between worlds where souls could become trapped or traded, reflections gaining autonomy when neglected or feared. The only hope was to confront the shadow, to acknowledge it as part of myself, and reclaim control before the reflection claimed my place entirely. Armed with newfound knowledge and a fragile resolve, I prepared for the ritual, a perilous dance on the knife edge between light and shadow. The mirror awaited. And so did the reflection. Half a minute stretched endlessly, a pocket of time where my mirror self lived by rules I couldn't begin to comprehend. In those 30 seconds, it grew more active, more deliberate, almost alive with intention. I began to notice gestures my reflection made that I hadn't. Movements unprompted by me. Mouth words I never spoke. Expressions that twisted the careful neutrality I tried so hard to maintain. Sometimes it pointed, at customers sitting unaware in the chair, at corners where shadows gathered unnervingly thick, and sometimes directly at me, eyes blazing with an urgency that squeezed my chest in panic. The expressions were the worst. My own face contorted into emotions I couldn't name. Fear, eyes wide, mouth agape as if screaming silent warnings I couldn't hear. Anger, brows furrowed, jaw clenched with an unrecognizable determination. But most disturbing were the pleading looks, silent begging for me to understand something vital, something that might save us both. If only I were smart enough to decipher it. My hands shook while cutting. Mrs. Rodriguez, a loyal customer for 15 years, noticed my nervousness. She asked gently if everything was okay at home. I stammered out that I lived alone, always had, probably always would. Who could understand this kind of madness? She left a larger tip than usual, patting my shoulder with maternal concern that choked me with unexpected emotion. The mirror consumed my thoughts. Between customers, I stood before it, obsessively timing the delay. 35 seconds. 38. 40. My reflection moved like a sleepwalker, always behind, always trying to catch up, but never synchronized with the life I lived. Then, on a Thursday heavy with storm clouds, something broke the pattern. I was sweeping hair from the floor when I glanced up. My reflection swept too, but backwards. Where I moved left to right, it moved right to left. When I bent to gather hair, it stood straight, gesturing frantically toward the ceiling. My heart thundered, sweat slicking my brow despite the air conditioning. I dropped the broom and stepped closer. My reflection dropped its broom, but then pressed both palms against the glass, mouthing words with desperate intensity. I couldn't hear, but I could read lips, help me. Then switch. Then soon. The room tilted. Fluorescent lights flickered, matching the rhythm of my racing pulse. I pressed my palms against the glass. For a fleeting moment, I felt warmth, my reflection's hands actually there, real, reaching through some impossible divide. The delay had grown to nearly a full minute. In that time, my reflection had become someone else, trapped, desperate, needing help, communicating only through pleading gestures, wearing my face like a mask. A chilling realization struck: what if I had it backward? What if I was the delayed one? What if my reflection wasn't lagging, but warning me? What if those frantic gestures were desperate attempts to show me something I had to see? I began following my reflection's gaze, noting the places it urgently pointed. It kept returning to the same corner behind and to the left of my barber chair, a corner where shadows gathered unnaturally thick, even in daylight. That corner always felt cold, even in summer. Customers had occasionally asked if I had a draft or if the heating was faulty. But I knew better. Something was waiting there. The chill in that corner wasn't just a draft. It was a presence, unseen, but heavy and watchful. Every time I glanced toward it, the hairs on my arms stood on end, as if something was breathing just beyond sight. One afternoon, when the shop was empty and the sunlight cast long, golden beams across the floor, I stood frozen, watching my reflection once again. It pointed insistently toward that shadowed corner, its eyes wide with silent warning. Summoning every ounce of courage, I stepped closer to the spot. The air grew colder, the silence thickened, pressing in around me like a living thing. Then I saw it. A faint outline, like smoke, or mist, hovered in the corner. It twisted and pulsed as if breathing, an amorphous shape both there and not there. My reflection's urgent gestures made sense now. It was trying to show me this presence, trying to warn me that something had crossed from beyond into my world. Fear surged, but so did determination. I knew I had to confront whatever was haunting that corner, to face the darkness gathering in my own shop before it consumed everything. Taking a deep breath, I reached into my drawer and pulled out a small vial of salt, a superstition, yes, but a talisman against the unknown. Sprinkling it carefully along the edge of the shadow, I held my breath. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the mist writhed, recoiling from the salt like flame from water, and a low, mournful wail filled the air, a sound of grief and rage from beyond the veil. The temperature plummeted. My breath formed clouds in front of me as the room darkened unnaturally despite the sunlight streaming through the windows. I felt eyes on me, dozens of them, watching, waiting. And I realized this was only the beginning. The reflection was not just a mirror image, it was a sentinel, a prisoner, a warning. And the shadow in the corner was the key. The presence lingered, thickening the air like smoke from a dying fire. The mournful wail faded but left behind an oppressive silence that pressed against my chest, making each breath shallow and labored. The sunlight no longer seemed to reach the corner, an unnatural shadow consuming light itself. Determined to understand, I dug into the history of the shop, uncovering old newspaper clippings buried in the town library archives. Decades ago, the building had been the site of a tragic fire, one that had claimed a young apprentice's life, a boy named Samuel who had vanished without a trace amidst the flames. Rumors whispered that his spirit never found rest, trapped in the mirror or lurking in the shadows, bound by fear and unfinished business. As the days passed, the mirror's delay lengthened further, and the shadow's presence grew more assertive. Objects moved slightly when I wasn't looking, whispers echoed in empty rooms, and the cold followed me like a persistent shadow. My reflection's gestures became frantic, pleading, as if trying to direct me towards something I was still missing. One night, guided by the reflection's desperate cues, I approached the corner again. This time, the shadow coalesced into a more defined form, a translucent figure of a boy, eyes wide with terror and sorrow, reaching out to me. "I'm here," I whispered, voice shaking. The boy's mouth moved soundlessly, but I understood. "Find the locket, free me." The weight of the task settled heavily on my shoulders. Somewhere within the shop was a locket, a key to freeing the trapped spirit and breaking the cycle of haunting. I steeled myself for the search, knowing that confronting the darkness meant facing not only the restless ghost but the fragile boundaries between this world and the next. The air grew colder as I stepped cautiously toward the corner where the translucent figure had appeared. The boy's pleading eyes bore into mine, his form flickering like a candle struggling against the wind. I reached out, my hand trembling, but my fingers passed through his ethereal shape as if grasping at smoke. "Where?" I whispered, desperate for a clue. His gaze shifted upward, to the cracked ceiling beams overhead, then to a tarnished, forgotten cabinet tucked away behind my barber's chair, one I'd rarely opened. The locket, he seemed to say, was hidden there. I moved quickly to the cabinet, the shadow of the boy trailing behind me like a silent companion. My fingers brushed aside dusty boxes and old barber tools until I found a small, rusted tin box. Heart pounding, I opened it to reveal a delicate silver locket, tarnished with age but still gleaming faintly in the dim light. I lifted the locket, feeling a strange warmth pulse through my palm, a stark contrast to the chill that permeated the room. As I held it up, the boy's figure brightened, his form becoming more solid, more real. "Thank you," he whispered, voice barely audible but filled with relief. But the moment was shattered by a sudden, violent gust that slammed the shop door shut, extinguishing the sunlight and plunging the room into darkness. The mirror shattered, cracks spiderwebbing across its surface as if breaking the barrier between worlds. The shadow in the corner writhed, growing larger, more menacing. The trapped spirit was freed, but something darker had been unleashed. I'd always chalked it up to poor insulation in this ancient building, the kind of cold that seeps through cracks and settles in the bones. But now, standing before the mirror, watching my reflections frantic, desperate pointing, I began to doubt everything I'd believed. Summoning my courage, I approached the cold corner the reflection fixated on. Each step made the floorboards groan beneath me, and with every footfall, the temperature dropped sharply, like stepping into a hidden cave beneath the world's surface. Kneeling, I pressed my ear against the cracked plaster of the wall. At first, I heard nothing but silence. Then, slow, rhythmic breathing, soft and steady, as if someone slept just beyond the barrier. The sound was faint, almost ghost-like, but unmistakable. A wave of nausea crashed over me as a terrifying realization took root. The breathing matched my own, but delayed. Exactly 1 minute behind. I wasn't staring at a mere reflection anymore. I was looking at myself, trapped in some temporal pocket, a place 1 minute behind this world. And something else, something that breathed in the walls, casting no reflection, was preparing to cross over and take my place. The switch was coming. My reflection had been warning me all along, struggling to make me see before it was too late. Now, as I stared into the glass, watching my mirrored self mouth the word now with desperate urgency, I knew the moment had arrived. The breathing inside the walls grew louder, more insistent, echoing in my chest. My reflection pressed its palms flat against the glass one final time, and the delay, the barrier, began to collapse. 55 seconds. 50. 45. Something was coming forward in time. The last thing I saw before the world twisted and shifted was my own face, not delayed, no longer desperate, but wearing an expression I had never known. A cruel, triumphant smile that was not mine. Story 3. Some roads aren't meant to be traveled. Some stretches of asphalt bend through realities we weren't meant to cross. I learned this the hard way, mile by terrifying mile. For 20 years, I'd driven the same route through Arkansas backwoods, hauling freight from Little Rock to Memphis and back. The same truck stops, the same faces behind cracked windshields, the same ribbon of cracked asphalt stretching endlessly beneath my headlights. The road had become part of me. Every pothole, every curve memorized so well I could drive it half asleep. Maybe that's why it took me so long to notice the changes. The 15-mile stretch between Crosset and Hamburg was always the loneliest part of my run. Pine trees pressed close to the shoulders, their branches forming a tunnel that swallowed my headlights' beams. By day, it was just another dull stretch of highway. But after midnight, when the world fell silent and the CB radio hissed with static from distant storms, that stretch felt different. Heavier. Like darkness itself had weight. The first time I heard the whispers, I blamed the radio tower outside El Dorado. The CB crackled with voices speaking some foreign language, not Spanish or French, but something older, with clicking consonants and vowels that seemed to curl back on themselves. I fiddled with the squelch knob, trying to clear the static. But the whispers only grew clearer as I drove deeper into that tunnel of trees. My hands sweated against the steering wheel. The voices weren't coming through the radio, they were inside the truck, too close, too intimate. Like someone was sitting right beside me, breathing words straight into my ear. I switched the CB off, but the whispers persisted, seeping through the metal walls. The speedometer needle trembled at 65 miles per hour, but my foot felt heavier on the accelerator, pushing harder against the pedal. Professional drivers don't panic. We've seen everything the road can throw at us. But I'd never seen anything like what awaited me at mile marker 247. The night air grew thick with an unnatural stillness as I approached mile marker 247. The pine trees loomed closer, their twisted branches clawing at the sky like skeletal fingers. The radio remained silent, the whispers vanished, leaving only a suffocating quiet that pressed in on me from all sides. My headlights pierced the darkness, but the road ahead seemed to blur and bend in impossible ways, as if the asphalt itself was warping beneath my tires. My grip tightened on the steering wheel, knuckles white, pulse racing. Suddenly, a figure appeared in the middle of the road, a woman, drenched in rain despite the dry night, her eyes reflecting an otherworldly glow. I slammed on the brakes, the truck skidding to a halt mere feet from her. She raised a pale hand, beckoning me forward with a voice that was both a whisper and a scream. "Follow me," she said. Against every instinct, I shifted into gear and followed her down a narrow, unmarked side road that twisted away from the highway and into the depths of the forest. The further we went, the more the world around me seemed to dissolve, the trees growing impossibly tall, shadows stretching and curling in unnatural shapes. As we reached a clearing, the woman vanished, leaving me alone under a sky churned with swirling clouds that pulsed with strange colors. Then the whispers returned, louder, urgent, swirling around me like a storm. I realized I had crossed into a place where the fabric between worlds thinned, where time and space bent, and lost souls wandered. And I was trapped. The road twisted and turned beneath my wheels, the trees closing in like a cage around me. Every shadow seemed alive, shifting just beyond the edge of my vision, whispering secrets I couldn't understand but felt deep in my bones. The radio crackled again, not with static this time, but with a faint, eerie melody that sent chills racing down my spine. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles pale and slick with sweat. The GPS blinked out, leaving me blindly navigating a landscape that no longer obeyed the laws of physics or time. The headlights flickered erratically, casting long, fractured shadows that danced on the gnarled trunks. At mile marker 247, the air grew dense, heavy like the moments before a storm breaks, and the whispers crescendoed into voices, pleading, warning, and sometimes laughing, their tones blending into a dissonant symphony. Then, through the swirling mist, a silhouette emerged, a man, weathered and hollow-eyed, standing motionless beside the road. His mouth moved, forming words I couldn't hear, but I understood the desperation etched on his face. I stopped the truck, heart hammering. He lifted a trembling hand, pointing toward the forest's edge where a faint glow pulsed like a heartbeat. Compelled beyond reason, I stepped out into the cold night, the gravel crunching beneath my boots as the voices swirled around me. The forest beckoned, a labyrinth of shadows and forgotten fears, promising truths I was both desperate and terrified to uncover. With each step deeper into the darkness, I felt the weight of unseen eyes watching, waiting, and a primal fear that the road I thought I knew had become a gateway to something far darker. The gravel crunched beneath my boots, sharp and brittle in the still night air. The forest loomed ahead like a gaping maw, its twisted branches forming grotesque shapes against the sickly glow of the distant light. The voices swirled around me, a chorus of desperation and warning that tangled in my mind, pulling me deeper into the shadowed labyrinth. With every step, the air grew colder, thick with a scent both ancient and decaying. The glow pulsed ahead, a faint heartbeat against the oppressive darkness, drawing me forward with a magnetic pull I couldn't resist. My breath formed misty clouds in the frigid air as I ventured further, the tree roots clutching at my boots like unseen hands trying to halt my progress. Suddenly, the forest fell silent. The voices ceased, leaving only the pounding of my heart and the distant whisper of the wind. Before me stood a clearing bathed in an unnatural, ethereal light, a circle of stones worn by time, etched with symbols that pulsed faintly, glowing with an otherworldly energy. In the center lay an old, rusted relic, a locket, half buried in the moss-covered earth. As I reached down, the ground trembled beneath me, and a chilling gust swept through the clearing, carrying with it a whisper that froze me in place, "Release us." The air thickened, and from the shadows emerged figures, translucent shapes, faces twisted in anguish, reaching out with silent pleas. The spirits trapped between worlds, bound by sorrow and vengeance, their torment entwined with the cursed road I had driven for 2 decades. I realized then that the road was not just a path between cities but a conduit for lost souls, a corridor where the veil between life and death thinned dangerously. And now, I was part of their story. The weight of the spirit's sorrow pressed down on me like a suffocating fog. Their silent pleas filled the air, swirling around the stone circle as if caught in an endless, mournful dance. I clutched the locket tightly, its cold metal biting into my palm, a tangible link to their restless souls. Determined to break the curse, I traced the faded symbols etched into the ancient stones, recalling fragments of old legends, rituals whispered in forgotten tongues that promised release but demanded sacrifice. As I began the incantation, the air grew electric, the ground beneath me trembling. The spirits' forms flickered, their anguish intensifying into a haunting chorus of wails that echoed through the night. Suddenly, a violent gust tore through the clearing, scattering leaves and snuffing the ethereal glow. The locket slipped from my grasp, tumbling into the shadows. Panic surged. I dove after it, my fingers brushing cold metal just as a shadow lunged forward, a presence darker than night itself, eyes burning with ancient malice. I wrestled with the darkness, heart pounding, desperate to hold on to the last hope for salvation. With a final, desperate cry, I clasped the locket and felt a surge of light burst from within, blinding and pure. The shadow screamed, dissolving into the ether as the spirit's wails softened into whispers of gratitude. The forest sighed, the oppressive weight lifting, the veil between worlds mending. Exhausted but free, I made my way back to the highway, the first light of dawn breaking through the trees. The road ahead was still long, but the curse was broken, for now. The old wooden bridge, a relic from the 1940s, stretched before me like a rickety promise, spanning the dark waters of Bayou Macon. It had always been a precarious crossing, 2 narrow lanes of weathered planks that groaned under every 18-wheeler, guarded by rusted rails that offered little comfort. I'd crossed it countless times without a second thought, but tonight, as my headlights carved through the fog, the whispers rose again, clawing at my mind with a language I couldn't decipher but felt deep within my bones. My heart thundered beneath my flannel, rattling ribs like a prisoner desperate for escape. I glanced at the GPS mounted on my dashboard, seeking the familiar coordinates marking the bridge. But the screen flickered wildly, numbers twisting and shifting like smoke caught in an impossible dance. 33 degrees 54 minutes 2 seconds north, 91 degrees 47 minutes 18 seconds west became 33 degrees 15 minutes 42 seconds north, 91 degrees 47 minutes 19 seconds west, then 19 degree 91 foot 47 inch 17W. The longitude leaping chaotically as if the bridge existed simultaneously in multiple places. My breath caught, fogging the windshield as I hit the defroster with a trembling hand. The condensation swirled into cryptic patterns, spirals and jagged angles that stabbed at my eyes if I dared look too long. Blinking, the patterns vanished, leaving only the clear glass and the pale reflection of my haunted face. The truck's tires struck the wooden planks with a hollow boom that echoed longer than reason allowed. Beneath me, Bayou Macon lay black and void, swallowing every speck of moonlight and star, a liquid abyss reflecting nothingness. The whispers surged louder, drowning out the engine's growl, a choir of voices speaking in eerie unison, uttering things my mind rejected but my gut understood as threats. Then, as I crossed the bridge's end onto solid asphalt, the voices snapped off abruptly, plunging the world into a silence more deafening than any sound. I scanned my mirrors, expecting some spectral pursuer, but saw only darkness and the fading red glow of my taillight swallowed by the trees. I told myself it was exhaustion catching up after 2 decades of midnight hauls. Maybe it was time to consider daylight runs, a life away from this endless stretch of darkness and whispered secrets. But 3 nights later, on the same route with a load bound for Memphis, the nightmare returned. Prepared this time, I killed the CB before entering the tree line and memorized the bridge's coordinates: 33 degrees 15 minutes 42 seconds north, 91 degrees 47 minutes 18 seconds west. I vowed not to be fooled again. Yet, the whispers seeped through the cab like smoke, voices layered with the authority of centuries, surrounding me, watching with 1,000 unseen eyes. The trees leaned in, branches clawing at the trailer, fingernails scraping metal in a slow, sinister rhythm. My hands trembled violently as I reached for the GPS. The screen displayed yet another distortion, 33 degrees 15 minutes 42 seconds north, 90 degrees 12 minutes 40 seconds west, placing the bridge a full mile west of its known location. Still, there it was, weathered planks, rusted guardrails, standing stubbornly where it always had. Pushing the accelerator, I urged the truck faster. The speedometer climbed, 75 miles per hour, the engine roared in protest, but I didn't care. I just needed to be off that cursed stretch. Beneath the tires, the planks sang discordant notes, a monstrous piano played by unseen hands. The whispers escalated into a shriek inside my skull, speaking in the alien tongue that blurred my vision and shook my grip. The GPS flickered wildly, coordinates spinning like a slot machine, 91 degree 47 foot 15 inch W. 91 degree 47 foot 20 inch W. 91 degree 47 foot 12 inch W. The bridge beneath me felt alive, trembling with a restless energy that seeped into the cab, rattling my nerves like the wildest storm. The radio's silence was shattered by a chorus of whispers, now rising into desperate cries that seemed to echo from the very bones of the old planks. My vision blurred, the edges of the world warping and stretching as if time itself was unraveling. The speedometer's needle wavered, refusing to settle, the numbers flickering between impossible speeds and blankness. Shadows flickered at the edges of my headlights, twisting into shapes I dared not name. The trees pressed in tighter, their branches scraping the metal sides like claws seeking to drag me into the darkness beyond. Then, suddenly, the truck shuddered violently, a lurch so fierce I nearly lost control. The engine screamed in agony, the gears grinding as if fighting an unseen force. Ahead, the road seemed to vanish into a swirling vortex of mist and shadow, a gaping maw waiting to swallow me whole. Panic surged, but my hands clenched the wheel tighter, heart pounding with a fierce determination. I couldn't stop now. Not when the darkness was reaching for me, trying to rewrite the rules of this cursed road. The whispers crescendoed into a cacophony, voices overlapping in a chaotic symphony of warning, lament, and malice. Faces appeared in the mist, hollow-eyed specters trapped between worlds, their mournful gazes burning into my soul. I realized with chilling clarity that this road wasn't just haunted, it was a threshold, a crossing point where the living and the dead collided. And I was caught in the middle. With a surge of desperate will, I pushed the accelerator, racing toward the fading light at the end of this nightmare stretch. The trees parted as if unwilling to claim me, the spectral faces wailing behind me in fading echoes. As the first hints of dawn pierced the horizon, the world righted itself. The twisted shadows dissolved, the road straightened, and the radio fell silent once more. I was free, for now. But the memory of those whispered voices, the shifting coordinates, and the haunted bridge would haunt me forever. The morning light was weak and hesitant, barely pushing back the shadows that clung to the edges of the world. I sat behind the wheel, hands trembling, heart still racing with the echoes of the night's horrors. The highway stretched out ahead, deceptively calm, as if nothing had shifted, but I knew better. The whispers, the shifting coordinates, the faces in the mist, they weren't gone. They had just retreated, waiting for the next traveler foolish enough to cross that cursed stretch of road. I tried to convince myself it was over, that dawn had severed the veil between worlds, but the cold knot in my gut said otherwise. Something had changed inside me. The road had marked me, and the shadows followed. Back at the truck stop, the other drivers noticed. They asked about the haunted look in my eyes, the way I flinched at sudden noises, the way I avoided the quiet stretches of highway after dark. I couldn't tell them, who would believe me? Instead, I started carrying talismans, old charms I found in roadside stores, and a worn journal where I scribbled every strange detail, every whispered warning. My runs became a battle between reality and the creeping darkness that sought to claim me. And every night, as the clock ticks closer to the witching hour, I hear the whispers again, distant, yet unmistakable. The road is waiting. And so am I. The truck shuddered violently as I crossed onto the bridge, the metal grating beneath the tires gleaming cold and alien under my headlights. The guardrails loomed like bars of a cage, their twisted shapes seeming to close in around me, suffocating the narrow path. The whispers escalated into a deafening roar, a cacophony of voices screaming from the very bones of the bridge itself. It felt as if the structure was alive, a malevolent beast hungry for souls. My hands gripped the wheel until my knuckles turned white, heart pounding in my ears louder than the engine's roar. The twisted shadows along the rails writhed, shifting into grotesque shapes that leered and reached toward me, grasping with impossible fingers. Suddenly, the world tilted. The asphalt beneath me fractured and dissolved, plunging me into a maelstrom of shifting realities. The GPS screens blinked frantically, each showing impossible coordinates, spinning through dimensions that defied logic and reason. The whispers morphed into voices, taunting, familiar, intimate, each one a fragment of my past. My ex-wife's bitter accusations, my father's disappointed sighs, the hollow smiles of former colleagues echoing through the storm. They tore at my mind, a relentless assault of guilt and regret. The cab grew colder, shadows creeping inward like living things. The road ahead vanished into a swirling vortex of light and darkness, pulling me toward an unknown fate. With a final desperate surge, I slammed the accelerator, fighting to outrun the madness. The twisted cage of the bridge rattled and screamed around me, but I refused to surrender. As dawn's first light pierced the horizon, the vortex spat me back onto solid ground. The whispers faded, leaving only the pounding of my heart and the steady hum of the engine. I was alive. But forever changed. The dawn's light was weak, filtering through a haze of exhaustion and lingering dread as I pulled into the parking lot of a rundown truck stop. My hands, still trembling, gripped the steering wheel with a white-knuckled desperation. The bridge, the cursed stretch, was behind me, but its mark was etched deep inside. I knew the road had shifted something inside me, something I couldn't shake. At the diner, the smell of strong coffee and fried grease felt almost foreign, like a tether to a world I feared I no longer fully belonged to. The waitress eyed me with concern, asking if I was all right. I gave her a tired smile and said, "Just a long night." It was the closest thing to the truth I could manage. Back in my truck, the GPS blinked erratically, coordinates changing by the second, none matching any place I recognized. I shut it off, refusing to let that madness invade any more of my mind. Sleep came fitfully that day, dreams haunted by shadowed figures and impossible geometry, endless roads folding back on themselves. When I woke, the whispers returned, not in my ears, but in my blood, a subtle pulse beneath the surface. I started carrying charms, bits of folk magic from roadside stands, hoping they'd offer some protection. I kept a journal, jotting every strange occurrence, every flicker of shadow or shift in time. The bridge was still there, a fixture of rust and rot, but to me, it had become a gateway, a doorway to places no man should tread. And every time I closed my eyes, I felt the pull, the lure of the shadows waiting just beyond the next mile. The road had claimed me. The fluorescent lights in the elevator shaft flickered with the dying gasps of old ballasts, casting erratic shadows that danced like restless spirits across the concrete walls. Each flicker seemed to pull the darkness closer, swallowing the space between the faint beams until the shaft became a yawning abyss. The stale air hung heavy, thick with dust and the faint scent of rusted metal and forgotten memories. I stood at the bottom, waiting for the elevator to arrive, or so I thought. The control panel's buttons glowed dimly, flickering in time with the lights above, as if the entire shaft were alive, breathing, and watching. The hum of the machinery was uneven, stuttering like a dying heartbeat, sending vibrations up through the steel cage around me. The doors shuddered open with a reluctant groan, revealing a car that was more shadow than metal, its interior impossibly deep and dark. Stepping inside, the cold seeped into my bones, and the air grew thick with a sense of waiting, anticipation that stretched beyond time. As the doors slid closed behind me, the lights blinked out completely, plunging me into a blackness so complete it felt like falling into a void. Then, the elevator began its ascent, but not as expected. Instead of the usual mechanical clatter and steady upward hum, a low, resonant tone filled the space, a vibration that seemed to pulse through my very soul. The numbers above the door began to cycle erratically, flashing digits that made no sense, some negative, others impossibly large, and a few that seemed to be coordinates or dates long forgotten. With every flicker of the lights, the shaft around me seemed to stretch and twist, warping into impossible geometries that defied logic and reason. The walls dissolved into shifting planes of color and shadow, folding in on themselves like origami from some otherworldly realm. I tried to steady my breath, but the air grew thinner, the pressure mounting until it felt like my chest would burst. Whispers echoed from every corner of the shaft, soft at first, then swelling into a chorus of voices speaking in tongues I could not comprehend. Suddenly, the elevator stopped with a jarring lurch. The doors slid open to reveal a corridor bathed in an eerie, unnatural light. The walls pulsed as if alive, and the floor beneath seemed to ripple like water. I stepped out cautiously, the echo of my footsteps swallowed by the shifting space. This was no ordinary basement or service level. This was a place between places, a threshold where reality bent and fractured. And whatever lurked here did not welcome visitors. The corridor stretched before me, an endless ribbon of light and shadow that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. The walls breathed, expanding and contracting in slow, hypnotic rhythms, as if the very building exhaled secrets it had held for centuries. My footsteps echoed hollowly, swallowed quickly by the shifting space that defied all logic. As I moved forward, the air grew thick with a metallic tang, sharp and cold, setting my nerves on edge. Shapes flickered at the periphery of my vision, shifting forms that darted away when I tried to focus. Whispers, no longer distant but urgent, filled the corridor, weaving together into fragmented sentences that teased at forgotten knowledge and unseen dangers. A door appeared, framed by twisting vines of light that seemed both organic and mechanical. I reached out, fingers brushing against the surface, and the whispers surged into a cacophony. The door pulsed, then slowly swung open, revealing a chamber unlike any I'd ever seen. Inside, a vast network of gears and pulsing crystals intertwined in impossible configurations. Time itself seemed tangled here, loops folding back on themselves, moments trapped in eternal recurrence. At the center floated an orb of shifting colors, casting eerie reflections that danced across the walls. I realized then that this place was a nexus, a crossroads of realities, a heart where dimensions converged and bled into one another. The elevator hadn't just taken me down, it had delivered me into the beating core of something vast and unfathomable. Suddenly, the whispers coalesced into a voice, ancient, resonant, and filled with longing. "Welcome, traveler. You have crossed beyond the veil." The voice echoed through the chamber, its resonance weaving into the very fabric of the space around me. It was neither male nor female, young nor old, it was timeless, a presence that existed beyond the bounds of human understanding. I stepped closer to the glowing orb, its shifting colors reflecting scenes, worlds overlapping, moments folding, lives converging and diverging in an endless dance. It was a living map of realities, a tapestry woven from the threads of existence itself. The voice spoke again, softer now, yet no less powerful. "You stand at the nexus of all things, where choices ripple through infinite dimensions. Here, the past, present, and future intertwine, and the path you choose will echo beyond your world." I felt the weight of destiny pressing down, the gravity of countless possibilities swirling around me. A part of me wanted to flee, to return to the safety of familiar reality. But another part, curious, yearning, urged me forward. The voice offered a choice, to return and forget, carrying only the faintest memory of this place, or to step fully through the portal and embrace the unknown, becoming a guardian of the fragile boundaries between worlds. With a deep breath, I reached out and touched the orb. A flood of visions cascaded through me, glimpses of distant stars, forgotten civilizations, and the delicate balance holding the cosmos together. I realized then that my journey had only just begun. The keys clicked with relentless precision, each stroke echoing through the eerie silence that clung to the hallway like a shroud. I swallowed hard, unable to tear my eyes away from the typewriter's rhythmic dance. The paper fed through steadily, lines of text appearing like whispered confessions etched in ink decades old. Curiosity pushed me forward, drawing me closer despite every instinct screaming to flee. I pressed my palm against the frosted glass, peering in deeper. The office was frozen in time, an anachronism haunting the modern building, a relic of a past that refused to let go. The clacking stopped abruptly. The typewriter's carriage returned to the starting position, and the machine fell silent, as if exhausted. I caught my breath. Then, the words on the page caught my eye. "Do you see me? Do you hear me? I am trapped between floors, forgotten but not gone. Help me." A cold dread seeped into my veins. I was no longer dealing with a simple mechanical failure. This was something else entirely. Something that lurked beneath the veneer of concrete and steel. Something that remembered. Something that waited. The chill in the air deepened as I stared at the haunting message typed out before me. My breath fogged the glass as I pressed closer, a knot tightening in my stomach. The message wasn't random, it was a plea, desperate and raw, reaching out across time and space. I stepped back from the door, my heart pounding with the weight of the unknown. The hallway stretched endlessly in both directions, silent now except for the faint hum of fluorescent light struggling to stay alive. I glanced at the elevator doors behind me, wondering if I could simply return to the safety of the world above. But something pulled me forward, an invisible thread tugging me deeper into the building's hidden secrets. Room 2012 loomed ahead, its door slightly ajar. Beyond the threshold, shadows flickered, and the faint scent of old paper and rust filled the air. Gathering every ounce of courage, I pushed the door open. Inside, the room was a mirror of the one before, but even more frozen in time. Stacks of yellow documents crowded every surface, and a single chair faced a dusty typewriter poised mid-sentence. The keys were silent now, but the air vibrated with the echo of countless untold stories. On the desk lay an old leather-bound journal, its cover cracked and worn. I reached out, fingers trembling as I opened it to the first page. The handwriting was neat but hurried, a frantic script that chronicled days spent trapped between floors, a life suspended in limbo. The author wrote of strange noises, flickering lights, and voices from the walls. Of a hidden door, a passage to somewhere beyond comprehension. And a warning. That those who ventured too deep risked never returning. I swallowed hard, realizing my job wasn't just to fix an elevator anymore. I had become part of a story far darker, far older, and far more dangerous than I could have imagined. The journal's pages whispered secrets of a place forgotten, not just by the city, but by time itself. Marcus flipped through hastily scribbled entries describing the hidden floor as a liminal space, caught between dimensions. It was a crossroads of lost souls and trapped memories, a prison built not of bricks but of unresolved anguish. Each entry grew darker, the writer's grip on reality unraveling as the days passed. There were accounts of shadowy figures glimpsed through peeling wallpaper, voices carried on the stale air that seemed to speak in riddles, and a persistent cold that seeped into the bones. The final entry was a frantic scrawl, "They watch from the walls. The elevator is their gateway. Help me before I become one of them." Marcus's hands trembled as he closed the journal. The oppressive silence was shattered by the sudden clang of metal echoing from the shaft, an unmistakable sign the elevator was moving on its own. Heart racing, Marcus rushed to the door and peered into the elevator car. Its interior was engulfed in shadow, the control panel flickering erratically. The unmarked button glowed faintly, pulsing with an eerie blue light. Summoning every ounce of courage, Marcus pressed the button again. The elevator shuddered violently, then descended deeper into darkness. As the car plunged below the known floors, the walls seemed to dissolve, replaced by shifting, surreal landscapes. Twisted corridors stretched endlessly, folding back on themselves in impossible geometries. Time warped, moments stretched and compressed, memories bleeding into the present. Marcus realized the hidden floor was a nexus, a realm between realities where lost souls lingered, waiting for release, or revenge. Ahead, a door materialized, ancient and ornate, inscribed with symbols that pulsed with otherworldly energy. Beyond it lay the heart of the Meridian Building's secret, and the source of the haunting. With a steadying breath, Marcus reached for the handle, knowing that what awaited him could change everything. The cold metal handle felt alive beneath Marcus's trembling fingers, pulsing with a faint, rhythmic energy that matched the eerie glow of the symbols etched into the door's surface. A quiet hum reverberated through the elevator car, growing louder with each heartbeat, until it was nearly deafening. He steeled himself and pulled the door open. Beyond lay a chamber that defied all logic, vast and cavernous, yet impossibly intimate. The walls shimmered like liquid glass, reflecting scenes that seemed to play out in endless loops, moments of joy, despair, betrayal, and loss from decades past. In the center, a spectral figure hovered, a woman clad in faded office attire, her eyes hollow yet piercing. Her lips moved soundlessly, mouthing words that Marcus could somehow understand: "Remember, free us." Around her floated countless other translucent forms, each trapped in their own private torment, bound to the building by secrets long buried beneath layers of concrete and silence. Marcus's heart pounded as he realized that the building itself was a prison, a cage forged by grief and guilt, fueled by unresolved stories and broken promises. He felt a cold hand brush his shoulder, not a touch, but a presence, urging him forward. Summoning his courage, Marcus stepped deeper into the chamber, determined to uncover the truth and break the curse that held these souls captive. But as he approached the spectral woman, a whisper slithered through the air, a warning laced with sorrow and menace. "Not all who seek the truth return." Marcus swallowed hard, the weight of the warning settling over him like a shroud. The chamber seemed to pulse with an ancient energy, the flickering images on the walls growing sharper, more urgent. The woman's hollow eyes bore into his soul, pleading silently for release, for redemption. He stepped forward, every instinct screaming caution, but driven by a growing resolve. "Tell me," he whispered, voice trembling, "what binds you here? How can I help?" The spectral figure's form shimmered, and memories flooded Marcus's mind, flashes of a fire long ago, screams swallowed by smoke, a betrayal so deep it fractured lives and souls alike. The woman was Eleanor, once a secretary at the Meridian Building, caught in a web of deceit and tragedy that claimed many innocent lives. As Marcus listened, the chamber seemed to warp, the spectral scenes twisting into horrifying visions of greed, cover-ups, and the desperate attempts to bury the truth beneath layers of concrete and silence. The spirits, trapped in endless loops of pain, longed for justice, for the story to be told, the wrongs to be acknowledged. But revealing the truth came at a cost. The building's malevolent force stirred, its shadowy tendrils reaching out, threatening to consume Marcus and drag him into eternal limbo. He realized the choice before him: flee and live with the burden of silence, or confront the darkness, risking his very soul to free the trapped. With a deep breath, Marcus stepped forward, ready to face whatever price freedom demanded. The phone on the desk rang incessantly, its rotary dial spinning with relentless precision, a relic frozen in time yet alive with unnatural purpose. I stood, frozen, my heart pounding as the typewriter finished its last line, the mechanical ding echoing through the glass like a final death knell. I reached for the door handle, locked. Every office along the corridor was the same, a prison of temporal displacement. Behind each frosted glass door, scenes from a bygone era played out endlessly, desks from the Carter administration, rotary phones long since obsolete, and those damned typewriters clacking away at invisible correspondences. The papers being produced were just out of reach, but I caught fragmented phrases repeating over and over in maddening loops. My breath came fast and shallow. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed with a maddening intensity, drilling into my skull. I could feel my pulse pounding in rhythm with the mechanical symphony around me. Each step I took felt like wading through thick syrup, the very air trying to trap me in this anomaly. As I ventured deeper, the details grew stranger and more unsettling. The water fountain bore a date stamped 1974, the fire extinguisher cases were relics from my childhood memories of my father's old office, and the exit signs glowed with a pale radium luminescence, long banned for health reasons. My blood ran cold when I saw the bulletin board near the elevator. Beneath a yellowed plastic cover, barely visible through grime, was a newspaper clipping: Meridian Building opens, city's newest commercial complex promises modern convenience. Dated September 15, 1974. Everything in the article matched the building above: the address, the architecture, the promise. Yet every official record I'd seen claimed the Meridian Building was constructed in 1998. Permits, inspections, occupancy certificates, all recent and legitimate. Suddenly, the typewriters fell silent. An oppressive quiet sucked the air from the corridor, my heartbeat pounding loud in my ears. The phones, relentless until then, began to cease their ringing, one by one. Offices 2011, 203, 205, 207, inching closer with each stop. I backed toward the elevator, each step muted but heavy with dread, feeling the growing presence of an unseen force methodically silencing the voices. The last phone to fall silent was just beside me, office 225. In that crushing silence, the sound of footsteps rose, dozens, perfectly synchronized, soft whispers of shoe leather on shag carpeting. They were rising from their desks, moving toward the doors. I stabbed the elevator call button with shaking fingers. The cab groaned alive, its movements deliberate, savoring my terror. Behind me, the first door rattled, then another, until all doors slammed against their locks, a desperate percussion of either escape or entrapment. The elevator doors slid open. I dove in, slamming the button for the ground floor again and again. As the elevator ascended, I caught one final glimpse of the corridor, all the office doors wide open, amber light spilling out, but the rooms empty, chairs pushed back from desks still warm with phantom presence. The typewriters had resumed, their keys clicking away in the endless dance of the trapped. When the doors finally opened to the ground floor, I fled without looking back, no tools, no explanations. I sped home through empty streets, knuckles white on the steering wheel, eyes darting to the rearview mirror, expecting pursuit. But none came. Still, I knew the building's secret had marked me. And some doors, once opened, never truly close. Marcus drove through the quiet streets, the city's normalcy a sharp contrast to the nightmare he'd just escaped. Yet, no matter how far he put between himself and the Meridian Building, the weight of what he'd seen pressed down harder with every mile. The endless offices frozen in time, the ceaseless typing, the cold footsteps, those images haunted the edges of his mind like shadows that refused to fade. At home, he couldn't shake the feeling that the building's secret had latched onto him. At night, his dreams were invaded by flickering lights and whispered voices, echoes of the long-lost souls trapped in that hidden floor. The journal he'd found burned in his memory, the desperate pleas, the warnings about never returning. Days passed. Marcus tried to return to his routine, but the elevator call was relentless. Phone calls from anxious building managers, requests for updates, and the gnawing suspicion that something more than mechanical failure was at play. One evening, as he prepared to leave his apartment, the power flickered and went out. In the sudden darkness, a faint glow emanated from his toolbox, the very one he'd brought from the Meridian. The glow pulsed softly, illuminating a small, ancient key he hadn't noticed before, nestled among his tools. His heart raced. The key felt warm in his palm, alive with purpose. He realized then that the building's mystery wasn't confined to its walls. It had followed him home. And the truth was far from over. The key felt heavy in my palm, its cold metal edges humming with a quiet energy that sent a shiver up my spine. I examined it closely, old, tarnished, yet intricately engraved with symbols I didn't recognize, curves and angles that seemed to shift subtly under the flickering light. Questions flooded my mind. How had it come to be in my toolbox? Had it been there all along, unnoticed? Or had the building somehow delivered it to me, a silent summons to return and uncover what I had only begun to glimpse? I tried to ignore the growing sense of dread, but it clung to me like a second skin. That night, sleep was elusive. The whispers from the meridian echoed in my mind, the mechanical clatter of typewriters, the ringing phones, the cold footsteps, all swirling into a dissonant chorus that refused to be silenced. By morning, resolve hardened within me. I had no choice but to go back. The city was waking, but my world narrowed to one goal, to return to the Meridian building and unlock the secrets hidden beneath its surface. As I approached the looming structure once more, the sun broke through the clouds, casting long shadows that stretched like fingers across the pavement. The doors slid open with a familiar, haunting groan. Inside, the stale air wrapped around me like a shroud. The elevator awaited, its unmarked button glowing faintly in the dim light. I clutched the key tightly as I stepped inside, ready to descend once more into the depths where time and reality twisted. The journey ahead was uncertain, the stakes higher than ever. But one thing was clear, whatever secrets the Meridian held, I was no longer just a repairman. I was part of the story. Marcus gripped the ancient key tightly as the elevator doors slid shut behind him. The familiar hum of the machinery was gone, replaced by a low, resonant vibration that seemed to pulse through his very bones. The unmarked button glowed brighter than before, inviting yet foreboding. With a deep breath, he pressed it, feeling the elevator lurch as it descended into realms beyond logic and time. The walls began to warp, twisting into impossible angles, and the air grew thick with whispers, some pleading, some warning, all tangled in a cosmic language. As the elevator plunged deeper, Marcus's thoughts raced, the key in his hand growing warm, pulsing with the building's ancient heartbeat. Suddenly, the doors slid open to reveal a vast chamber flooded with ethereal light, where memories, shadows, and forgotten dreams mingled in a shifting dance. At the chamber's center stood a figure, half-formed, caught between worlds, who turned slowly, eyes filled with both sorrow and hope. "You hold the key," the apparition said, voice echoing like a distant storm. "Will you free us, or become one of us?" Marcus stepped forward, the weight of choice heavy upon him, knowing that what he did next would echo through realities. Marcus felt the chill of the apparition's gaze settle deep into his bones, an unsettling mix of sorrow and hope radiating from those half-formed eyes. The chamber's shifting light cast long, wavering shadows that danced like flickering memories, surrounding him with whispers of lives lost and stories unfinished. He held the ancient key tightly, its warmth pulsing in rhythm with the chamber's ethereal heartbeat. The weight of the choice before him pressed like a stone on his chest. To free these trapped souls meant risking everything, perhaps even his own existence. To refuse could condemn them to eternal torment, but to accept might bind him forever to this liminal space. "Tell me," Marcus's voice trembled, "what must I do to free you?" The apparition's form shimmered, coalescing into images, scenes of betrayal, forgotten promises, and a terrible fire that had sealed their fate within the Meridian's walls. The souls were tethered by a curse, a cycle of pain sustained by silence and neglect. "You must open the heart of the building," the apparition intoned, "and face the shadow that feeds on despair. Only then can the cycle be broken." A dark shape stirred at the edge of the chamber, a presence older than the building itself, pulsating with malice and grief. It loomed, waiting, a final test for any who dared seek liberation. Marcus swallowed his fear, steeling himself for the confrontation that would decide not just his fate, but the fate of countless trapped souls. With the key glowing fiercely in his hand, he stepped toward the shadow, ready to challenge the darkness and reclaim the light. The fluorescent lights above the front desk hummed their sickly tune, casting everything in that pale institutional glow that made even healthy skin look corpse-like. It was 2:47 a.m. on another sleepless night at the roadside rest, and the only sounds were the distant rumble of 18-wheelers on the highway and the persistent buzz of dying electricity. That's when I first noticed the discrepancy that would unravel my grip on reality over the next 2 weeks. My name is Marcus, and I've been working the night shift at this forgotten strip of asphalt and broken dreams for 3 years now. 29 years old, no college degree, no prospects, just a guy who found his niche in the hours when most people sleep and decent folks avoid places like this. The roadside rest sits on Highway 50, somewhere between nowhere and nothing, catering to truckers, traveling salesmen, and the occasional family desperate enough to ignore our one-star reviews. That night, the computer system showed room 13 as occupied, a red block glowing ominously on the screen indicating someone had checked in. But according to every physical record I could find, the registration book, the key log, even the cleaning schedule, the room had been empty for 6 days. Puzzled, I decided to investigate. The corridor was silent, lit only by the flickering emergency exit signs that sputtered against the darkness. Room 13 sat at the end, its door shut tight. I swiped my master keycard, and the lock clicked open with a mechanical groan. Inside, the room looked ordinary at first glance: an unmade bed, a flickering television, and a half-empty cup of coffee sitting on the nightstand. But something felt off. The air was colder, heavier, and the faint hum of electricity seemed to pulse in rhythm with my own heartbeat. I stepped further in, and the door slammed shut behind me with a violent bang that echoed through the small room. The television flickered violently before cutting to static, and the temperature dropped further, my breath misting in the stale air. Suddenly, the faintest whisper brushed past my ear, a voice calling a name I hadn't heard in years. My skin prickled, and I spun around, but the room remained empty, save for the unsettling silence that followed. Over the next 2 weeks, strange things escalated. Room 13 appeared occupied on the system nightly, but no one was ever seen. Guests reported flickering lights, disembodied footsteps in the halls, and doors slamming on their own. The cleaning staff refused to enter the corridor after midnight. And I found myself drawn back to that room, compelled by a force I couldn't explain, caught between curiosity and fear. The roadside rest wasn't just a tired old motel on a forgotten highway. It was a crossroads, where the living brushed against the lost, and the restless refused to move on. And in room 13, time itself seemed to fracture. The door to room 13 seemed to hold a presence all its own, silent yet insistent, like a heartbeat in the walls. Each night, I found myself compelled to stand before it, the flickering hallway lights casting long shadows that seemed to reach out and pull me closer. I could feel the hum of energy vibrating through the keycard reader, a low pulse that matched the racing of my own heart. One night, as the clock edged toward 3 a.m., I decided to take a step no one else dared. With my hand trembling, I slipped the keycard into the lock and pushed the door open. Inside, the room was colder than the night outside, the air thick with the scent of old paper and faintly burned coffee. The television was on, displaying static that shimmered like liquid silver. The bed was neatly made, as if waiting for someone who had never returned. I stepped inside, and the door slammed shut behind me with a force that made the walls shudder. The static on the TV coalesced into a faint image, a grainy, flickering silhouette of a man sitting at a desk, typing relentlessly on an old typewriter. The clacking of keys echoed through the room, even though no typewriter was present. The whispering began, soft at first, growing louder, voices layered in a tapestry of despair and longing. I heard my name called, but also the names of strangers, memories not my own. Faces flashed in the static, trapped souls playing out endless loops of their final moments. Panic surged, but beneath it was a curious pull, a desperate yearning to understand, to help. I reached out to touch the television screen, and the static rippled under my fingers like water, pulling me closer to the fractured reality contained within. Marcus stared at the monitor, his tired eyes straining to reconcile the contradiction. The timestamp marked room 13 as occupied at 11:43 p.m., roughly 3 hours into his shift. Yet, he hadn't checked anyone in. A subtle, irregular rhythm stirred in his chest, a flutter he chalked up to caffeine and exhaustion. Grabbing the master keys, Marcus decided to investigate. The walk from the front desk to room 13 felt unusually long. His footsteps echoed softly on concrete that seemed to swallow sound rather than reflect it. The motel's familiar L-shaped layout stretched before him, room 13 isolated at the far end of the east wing, away from the other occupied rooms. The door appeared ordinary enough, faded green paint, tarnished brass numbers matching every other room. But the space around it felt different, denser, as if the air resisted his movement. Pressing his ear against the door, Marcus heard nothing. Absolute silence. Not even the usual hum of the air conditioning. He knocked softly, announcing himself as hotel staff per protocol. No answer. Using the master key, he unlocked the door and stepped inside. The room was empty, bed made, carpet vacuumed, bathroom spotless. Exactly as expected for an unoccupied room. Yet, the computer still showed it as occupied. A strange scent lingered, something organic, faintly sweet, like flowers left too long in stagnant water. Marcus returned to the desk and checked the system again. Still marked occupied, he manually set it to vacant, watching the red block turn green. Problem solved. Perhaps a glitch in aging technology. But at 3:15 a.m., the room lit up as occupied once more. This time, Marcus didn't rush to check. Instead, he pulled up security camera feeds from the East Wing, where room 13 was visible. Rewinding to 11:43 p.m., the exact moment of the initial occupation, he watched grainy, black and white footage unfold. Shadows looked solid, solid objects wavered. Minutes passed without incident, just empty concrete and occasional trucks passing, headlights briefly sweeping the scene. Then she appeared. At 11:42 p.m., a translucent figure approached room 13, carrying 2 suitcases, moving purposefully to the door. Marcus couldn't see whether she used a key, but the door opened, and she disappeared inside. 1 minute later, the system marked the room occupied. His mouth went dry. Replaying the footage confirmed the impossible, a figure definitely there, yet too translucent, movements too smooth and unnatural, lacking human imperfection. Fast forwarding to 6 a.m. when the day shift arrived, the room showed vacant again. At 5:58 a.m., the same figure emerged, suitcases in hand, moving toward the camera. For a brief moment, Marcus discerned her features, middle-aged, dark hair pulled back tightly, dressed in a severe business suit. Then she vanished beyond the camera's reach. Night after night, 11:43 p.m. arrival, departure before 6 a.m., the pattern unbroken. The guest was no ordinary occupant. She was a shadow haunting the motel's forgotten wing. Marcus's curiosity gnawed at him relentlessly. The spectral guest, this silent, translucent woman bound to room 13, had become the pulse of his restless nights. He scoured every record he could find, old guest logs, maintenance reports, local news archives, even whispered rumors from longtime employees. But nothing explained the woman's nightly appearances or the haunting pattern she wove through the motel's history. One evening, after his shift, Marcus sat under the harsh glow of the front desk lamp, poring over a dusty box of old newspapers from the town's public library. Buried deep within a brittle microfilm reel, he found an article dated October 1974, the same year hinted at in the Meridian Building's ghostly basement. The headline chilled him: "Tragedy at Crestwood Motel, Overnight Fire Claims Several Lives." The article described a fire that swept through the motel's east wing, the very section containing what was now room 13. Several night shift workers and guests were trapped inside, their fate sealed by a faulty fire escape door. The investigation had stalled amid conflicting testimonies and a mysterious disappearance of critical evidence. Marcus's fingers trembled as he read on. Among the victims was a woman named Evelyn Harper, a businesswoman traveling through town, last seen carrying 2 suitcases. Employees remembered her as polite but reserved, a figure who kept to herself and vanished soon after the fire. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. The spectral guest haunting room 13 was Evelyn, trapped in a temporal purgatory, forever replaying the night she never escaped. Determined to find answers, Marcus began interviewing former motel staff and locals. Many were reluctant to speak, their eyes clouded with fear or sorrow. Yet, one old night clerk finally revealed a chilling secret: rumors of a hidden room in the East Wing, sealed off after the fire, where the air felt thick and heavy, and unexplained phenomena clustered like a storm. Armed with the key from the Meridian Building and a growing resolve, Marcus resolved to explore the forbidden depths of the roadside rest, to uncover the truth behind Evelyn's eternal shift, and perhaps, to find a way to set her free. Marcus stood before the sealed door in the east wing, its surface scarred by time and neglect. The faded paint peeled like forgotten memories, and a rusty padlock secured it shut. The air here was thicker, heavier, charged with a palpable tension that pressed against his chest like a weight. He pulled the ancient key from his pocket, the same one from the Meridian building, its cold metal a stark contrast to the warmth of his palm. With a deep breath, he inserted the key into the lock. The mechanism resisted for a moment, groaning as if protesting after decades of silence, before finally yielding with a harsh click. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow stairwell descending into darkness. Dust motes danced in the weak beam of his flashlight, suspended like trapped souls in the stale air. The scent of stale water and old smoke clung to the walls. Marcus hesitated for only a moment before stepping inside, the stairs groaning under his weight. The deeper he descended, the colder the air became, seeping into his bones like the touch of unseen hands. At the bottom, he found himself in a vast basement corridor, lined with faded office doors and flickering, faulty lights. The atmosphere was suffocating, time seemed fractured here, a liminal space where past and present collided. Then, from the darkness ahead, a soft tapping echoed, a rhythmic pattern, like the clacking of typewriter keys. Marcus's heart pounded as he moved toward the sound, the whisper of footsteps following close behind. In a small room at the corridor's end, he found the source, an antique typewriter, keys moving on their own, producing endless streams of text. Papers littered the floor, their words repeating in maddening loops. Suddenly, the air shifted. A figure materialized, Evelyn, her translucent form flickering like a fading candle. Her eyes met Marcus's with a mix of sorrow and hope. "Help me," she whispered, voice barely audible yet searingly clear. Marcus knew then that freeing her meant unraveling the secrets buried deep within this temporal prison, a journey that could cost him everything. Marcus's heart slammed against his ribs as the crisp, unfamiliar voice pierced the eerie silence of the night shift. He gripped the receiver tightly, barely daring to breathe. "Hello?" he managed, voice trembling. "Front desk," she replied smoothly, "how can I help you?" The professionalism in her tone was unsettlingly normal, almost too perfect against the backdrop of ghostly visits and impossible sightings. This is Marcus, night shift. I'm calling from the front desk about room 13, it's showing as occupied, but no one's checked in," he stammered. There was a pause, a subtle hesitation that made his skin crawl. "Room 13, she echoed, voice now quieter. "I'm sorry, there's no one checked in there. Must be a mistake. I just saw you on the security footage," Marcus blurted, heart hammering. "You come every night. You don't leave." The line went silent for a long, suffocating moment. Finally, the voice answered, low and solemn, "I'm here because I can't leave. Because this place, it won't let me." A chill slithered down Marcus's spine. "Who are you?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. "I'm Evelyn," she said simply. "And I need your help." The call ended abruptly, the dial tone buzzing in Marcus's ear like a cruel reminder that this was no ordinary haunting. He sat back, mind racing, the weight of her words settling over him. Evelyn wasn't just a ghost. She was a trapped soul, bound by a secret that demanded to be unraveled. And Marcus was the only one who could. Marcus sat back, the receiver still warm in his hand, Evelyn's words echoing in his mind like a haunting refrain. He knew that what bound her to room 13 was more than just unfinished business, it was a mystery woven into the very fabric of the motel's dark past. Determined to uncover the truth, Marcus delved into every resource available. He pored over old newspaper archives, fire department reports, and faded guest registries, piecing together the events of that fateful night decades ago. He discovered that Evelyn Harper had been a traveling businesswoman, en route to a crucial meeting. The fire had trapped her and several others in the East Wing, their escape blocked by a malfunctioning fire door that should have been repaired long before. Official reports were sparse, mysteriously redacted in places, and witnesses' accounts conflicted wildly. More unsettling were whispered rumors among longtime locals, stories of a sealed-off wing in the motel, where strange noises and ghostly apparitions were common. Some claimed the fire was no accident but a cover-up to hide a darker crime, one that had condemned Evelyn and the others to eternal limbo. Armed with this knowledge, Marcus returned to room 13, clutching the old key from the Meridian building, a symbol of hope and a tool for unlocking hidden doors, both literal and metaphorical. As he turned the key in the lock, the air thickened, and the room seemed to shift, revealing glimpses of the past, Evelyn trapped behind smoke-filled halls, calling out for help, her fate sealed by betrayal and neglect. Marcus understood that to free Evelyn, he needed to confront not only the physical remnants of the past but also the lies and silence that had imprisoned her spirit. The journey ahead would test his courage and unravel the darkest secrets hiding in plain sight. Marcus hung up the phone with hands shaking uncontrollably, barely able to replace the receiver. She had answered, the translucent woman carrying suitcases had spoken, her voice chillingly real from within room 13. The next 3 nights blurred into sleepless terror and obsessive note-taking. Each night, the guest grew more solid, more present. By the 13th night, Marcus realized the significance of the number, a cruel joke by whatever dark force puppeteered this nightmare. She appeared fully human now, professional attire, sensible shoes, a weary traveler's look. Under normal circumstances, she'd have been just another guest. But these were not normal circumstances. At 2:30 a.m. on that 13th night, she emerged from room 13, footsteps steady and purposeful on the cold concrete. The front door chimed electronically, announcing her arrival. Marcus froze, heart pounding so loud it drowned out the world. She stood at the counter, her skin waxy, as if caked in too much foundation, her eyes sharp but empty, void of warmth or life. That familiar organic sweetness lingered stronger, suffocating. "I'd like to check in," she said, voice clinical and calm, "room 13, please." His throat seized, no words formed. She waited, expression unchanged, a mask of polite professionalism. Finally, he stammered, "Room 13 is already occupied." A horrific smile stretched her lips, revealing unnaturally perfect teeth. "It's mine," she said flatly. "Always has been. I've been here a long time, a model guest." Her claim was chillingly true, not in the way Marcus understood check-ins, but in the deeper reality, room 13 was hers. She had spent 2 weeks becoming real enough to exist here. Now, she was claiming it officially. Marcus's hands moved of their own accord as he reached for the registration book. She gave the name Patricia Hensley, an unknown city address. Her driver's license looked authentic, except the photo mirrored her waxy skin and lifeless eyes. He completed the check-in as if detached from himself. Patricia paid exact change in cash, real, yet somehow wrong in his hands. She accepted her key, though neither needed it. Before leaving, she paused. "I appreciate your discretion about my hours," she said, voice low, "I prefer a low profile." Then she disappeared down the hall, back to the room that was her prison. Marcus quit the next morning, slipping away without notice or explanation, packing his bags and leaving town that very day. But sometimes, in the deep silence of sleepless nights, he wonders if Patricia Hensley still haunts room 13. If she was the first, or if other spectral figures are learning to become real in the motel's other forgotten rooms, trapped in endless cycles between worlds. The Roadside Rest Motel, a place where the living and the dead blur into one. The Roadside Rest Motel was no longer just a place for weary travelers to find a brief respite, it had become a nexus for restless souls caught between worlds. Patricia Hensley was only the beginning, the first among many spectral guests who lingered in its decaying halls. Marcus learned, through whispered rumors and shadowed stories shared by those few who dared linger near the motel at night, that these apparitions were not mere hauntings. They were trapped fragments of lives interrupted, souls tethered to the motel by unfinished business, lost memories, or unresolved pain. Each night, the halls echoed with footsteps that never touched the ground, doors creaked open to reveal empty rooms, and the flickering fluorescent lights cast ghostly silhouettes on peeling wallpaper. Some guests claimed to hear the distant clatter of typewriter keys, a mechanical symphony from an era long gone, while others reported fleeting glimpses of figures carrying luggage, their faces blurred and indistinct. Marcus found himself haunted too, not just by Patricia, but by the weight of all those spectral guests. They weren't trying to scare, they were trying to be remembered, to have their stories told, to find release from the loop that bound them. The motel itself seemed alive, a living prison feeding on memories and lost time. It held its spectral guests captive, weaving their fates into the very fabric of the building. Marcus knew that unless these stories were uncovered and the truths laid bare, the cycle would continue, trapping more souls in that fluorescent-lit purgatory. And somewhere in the darkness, the spectral guests waited, hoping for a chance at freedom. Marcus felt the weight of those lost souls pressing down on him like a shadow he couldn't shake. The roadside rest motel had become more than a haunted relic, it was a prison for forgotten stories, a labyrinth of memories that refused to fade. Determined to break the cycle, Marcus began gathering every scrap of evidence, old guest registries, faded photographs, maintenance logs, even personal belongings left behind. Each item was a thread, a key to unraveling the tangled past of the motel's spectral guests. He reached out to local historians, former employees, and relatives of those who had vanished within the motel's walls. Their stories painted a haunting tapestry of tragedy and neglect, fires concealed, secrets buried beneath layers of dust and silence. Marcus knew he couldn't do this alone. He sought out those willing to listen, forming a small circle of believers ready to confront the motel's dark heart. Together, they planned a vigil, a night of remembrance and reckoning. Candles would burn, names would be spoken aloud, and the motel's forgotten souls would be invited to find peace. As the vigil night approached, the motel seemed to respond, lights flickered, the air grew thick with anticipation, and faint whispers threaded through the halls like a solemn choir. Marcus stood at the front desk, heart pounding with hope and fear, ready to face whatever came next. Because freeing the spectral guests meant confronting the motel's darkest truths, and breaking the curse that had held them captive for decades. As twilight deepened into night, the roadside rest motel seemed to hold its breath. Marcus and the small group of believers gathered in the dimly lit lobby, candles flickering softly in their hands. The air was thick, charged with anticipation, sorrow, and something unseen stirring in the shadows. Marcus began, his voice steady but low, recounting the names and stories he'd uncovered. Each name spoken was met with a flicker in the candle flames, a whisper just beyond hearing, as if the motel itself acknowledged their presence. They moved through the hallways, stopping before room 13 and others marked by strange occurrences. With each step, the air grew colder, and the faint sound of typewriter keys echoed, soft, rhythmic, a heartbeat of a forgotten time. Suddenly, a chorus of spectral figures emerged, translucent, shimmering souls bound to the motel by pain and unfinished business. Their eyes met Marcus's, a mix of gratitude and despair shining through. The group continued the vigil, voices raised in remembrance and release, breaking the silence that had imprisoned these souls for decades. A swirling light gathered at the heart of the motel, a vortex of energy that pulsed and expanded until, with a final brilliant flash, it dissipated. The motel's oppressive weight lifted, replaced by an eerie calm, the spectral guests freed to move on beyond the veil. Marcus exhaled deeply, exhaustion and relief mingling as he realized the nightmare was over. Yet, as he stepped outside into the cool night air, he couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere, in the quiet corners of the world, other haunted places waited, and that his journey was only beginning. Marcus's breath hitched as he studied the photograph. The woman's eyes, though captured in black and white, seemed to pierce right through him, filled with a raw, aching desperation. She hadn't been visible when he took the shot, yet there she was, frozen in time beneath the oak tree's skeletal branches. His hands trembled as he examined the other images. At the abandoned gas station, a shadowy figure lingered near the rusted pumps, a man, his posture slumped, as if weighed down by invisible chains. In the park, a small child stood alone on the jogging path, face obscured but body tense, frozen in a moment of silent terror. The static electricity pulsed again, a cold current crawling up his spine. The camera in his hands was no ordinary relic, it was a vessel, a window into something hidden beneath the fabric of the everyday world. The shadows it revealed were echoes, lost souls caught between the here and the beyond, desperate to be seen, to be remembered. Marcus's mind raced. Was the camera cursed? Or was it a gift? A tool to uncover truths lurking in the spaces between light and shadow, time and memory. As he prepared to develop the next role, the room's red glow deepened, and the whispered hum of electricity seemed to grow louder, carrying with it the faintest trace of voices, cries from those trapped just beyond sight. He realized then that his quiet, solitary life was about to unravel, pulled into a realm where past and present collided, and the veil between worlds was dangerously thin. The following nights unfolded in a haze of obsession and unease. Marcus found himself drawn relentlessly back to the darkroom, the Leica camera's images whispering secrets he couldn't ignore. Every photograph developed revealed another fragment of a hidden world, shadows lurking in familiar places, figures frozen in moments of silent despair. One night, as he prepared the chemicals under the crimson glow, a sudden chill swept through the room. The temperature dropped sharply, his breath visible in the air. The familiar hum of the developing machine was drowned out by a low, distant murmur, voices speaking in tongues just beyond comprehension. He glanced up at the print drying rack. There, a new image had appeared on its own, a close-up of the woman beneath the oak tree, her eyes more vivid, almost pleading. Marcus reached out, fingers trembling, and felt a jolt of static electricity leap from the photograph to his skin. The room seemed to warp and shimmer. For a fleeting moment, the walls of his basement dissolved into mist, revealing the twisted branches of that ancient oak. The line between reality and the unseen blurred dangerously. Haunted yet compelled, Marcus knew he had to understand what the Leica was revealing, the hidden stories trapped in its lens, and the restless spirits seeking his help. Marcus's nights grew darker as the mysteries of the spectral woman deepened, her presence haunting the edges of his waking and dreaming hours alike. The Leica camera, once a mere tool of his craft, had become a conduit, a bridge between worlds visible only through its cold, mechanical eye. He pored over every photograph, every shadowed figure, tracing the woman's story through time and place. Her name, he learned, was Lillian Grace, a woman who had vanished without a trace nearly 50 years ago. Local archives told of her last known sighting beneath the very oak tree Marcus had photographed, on a night swollen with thunder and secrets. Whispers from elderly townsfolk spoke of a tragedy, Lillian, a young artist, lost in grief and despair after a love shattered by betrayal and death. Some said she had wandered into the woods, never to return, others believed she had been taken, trapped in a liminal space between life and death. The images captured by Marcus's Leica seemed to confirm both stories and contradictions, a woman caught in an endless loop, her spirit tethered to the land and the broken memories left behind. One evening, as Marcus developed another roll of film, a letter slipped from between the pages of an old local history book he'd borrowed. It was addressed to Lillian, penned by her lover, words filled with regret, apologies, and a plea for forgiveness. The letter spoke of a promise to reunite, but it never came. Marcus felt the weight of the letter's sorrow press against him. He realized that to help Lillian, he needed to break the cycle of pain and betrayal that bound her. The Leica, with its unnatural vision, was not just showing him shadows, it was urging him toward redemption. Marcus sank into the cold floor, overwhelmed by the mounting horror the photographs revealed. The darkroom's red glow now felt oppressive, as if the very walls pulsed with the agony captured on each frame. The figures, ghostly yet impossibly vivid, were not mere shadows or tricks of the lens. They were desperate, real, trapped souls silently screaming through time. His eyes darted from one print to another, the dates and coordinates scrawled on their cardboard signs burning into his mind like a map of impending tragedy. May 29, 2025. Tomorrow's date. Manhattan, New Jersey. Locations tied to recent disasters and ongoing misfortunes, places where the thin veil between life and death seemed perilously fragile. The air thickened as he developed each image, the faces more numerous, their pleas louder, filling the darkroom with a spectral cacophony only he could hear. Each shutter click during his photo session sent shivers of static electricity racing up his arms, as though the camera itself was a beacon, drawing these lost souls closer. Sleep became impossible. The faces haunted his dreams, their silent screams echoing in his ears. At times, he felt watched, the Leica's cold gaze following him like an unseen sentinel. Rational explanations slipped away, replaced by a chilling certainty. Marcus had stumbled into a window between worlds. The next morning, haunted and exhausted, he stared at news reports connecting the coordinates to real-world tragedies. The camera wasn't just capturing images, it was revealing a tapestry of suffering woven across time and space. Despite every warning in his mind, he knew he had to keep photographing, to follow this spectral trail wherever it led. The Leica was no longer just a tool. It was a summons. Marcus had crossed the threshold. And now, the shadows beckoned. Nights bled into restless days as Marcus became consumed by the Leica's haunting revelations. Each roll of film developed in his crimson-lit darkroom revealed more desperate faces, more chilling messages, and more impossible signs of tragedies both past and imminent. The camera seemed to bridge time itself, capturing echoes of souls trapped in moments of fear and anguish, souls reaching out across the veil, desperate for recognition. Driven by equal parts dread and determination, Marcus began mapping the dates and coordinates, tracing a pattern of disasters and unexplained events tied to the spectral figure's appearances. Some places he visited were marked by recent tragedy, others held secrets buried for decades. Wherever the Leica's lens turned, the boundary between the living and the lost grew thinner. One evening, Marcus arrived at a forgotten cemetery just as dusk swallowed the sky. The weathered tombstones leaned like silent sentinels, their inscriptions worn by time. Through the Leica's viewfinder, the shadows between the graves shifted and deepened, revealing ghostly figures standing motionless, clutching their haunting signs. As he raised the camera, a cold gust whispered through the air, carrying faint voices and the scent of damp earth. The Leica's shutter clicked, capturing not just an image, but a fragment of a hidden world. Marcus lowered the camera, heart pounding. The journey was no longer just about photographs, it was a race against an unseen tide of sorrow and forgotten pain. He realized that understanding the spectral woman, and the many souls like her, meant confronting the very fabric of time, memory, and loss. Marcus's breath hitched as the horrifying truth settled over him like a suffocating fog. The dates on the signs weren't random, they marched forward, a chilling calendar of disasters yet to unfold. The coordinates mapped a path of destruction spanning the country, a bridge collapse in Oregon, a gas explosion in Texas, a sinkhole in Florida. Each catastrophe matched precisely the details held by the trapped figures in his photographs. But they weren't just victims. They were survivors, witnesses, people caught in moments that would forever change their lives. And they were reaching through time, desperate to warn anyone who could see. The realization deepened when faces in the photographs struck a haunting familiarity. The elderly man in the park was Mr. Henderson, the kindly grocer who had died over a year ago. The young woman was Sarah Chen, a local artist whose vibrant works Marcus had once photographed, also gone. The weight of the knowledge crushed him. These souls weren't just trapped in images. They were suspended between realities, caught in a liminal space where past, present, and future blurred. That night, driven by equal parts terror and resolve, Marcus pointed the Leica at himself, hands shaking violently. The shutter clicked, the flash unnaturally bright. For a heartbeat, he thought he glimpsed faces reflected behind him, dozens of pleading eyes staring from the shadows. Developing the final image tested every shred of his courage. There he was, staring back, but behind him, stretching into impossible depths, stood dozens of translucent figures. Each held a sign marked with dates and coordinates, all fixed in silent, desperate hope. And in his own hands, reflected in the mirror, was a sign, a date 6 months in the future, the coordinates of his home, his darkroom, where he stood. The camera had chosen him. He was now part of the collection. Attempts to destroy the Leica, hammer blows, flames, even burying it deep in the woods, were futile. The camera always returned, untouched and patient, waiting for the next roll of film, the next moment to claim. Marcus no longer took photographs. Not willing to trap another soul in the endless web. But sometimes, in the corner of his eye, he caught glimpses, other photographers, other haunted cameras, other moments frozen in time. The network was growing. Spreading, one captured instant at a time. Marcus felt the weight of inevitability settle upon him like a suffocating cloak. The Leica was no longer just an object, it was a sentinel, a tether pulling him deeper into a world where time fractured and souls lingered in suspended moments of despair. Haunted by the chilling revelation, Marcus began seeking answers beyond the veil. He reached out to others rumored to possess cursed cameras, haunted photographs, or glimpses of the otherworldly. Through whispered conversations in shadowed corners and encrypted messages on forgotten forums, he learned that the Leica was part of a larger phenomenon, a network of objects bound by sorrow and tethered to the thin places where realities overlap. Each camera, each lens, was a prison and a beacon, capturing not just images but fragments of trapped consciousness. Photographers who fell under their spell became unwitting guardians and prisoners alike, walking the line between witness and participant in the unfolding mystery. Determined to break free, Marcus embarked on a journey to uncover the origins of the Leica, tracing it back through decades of ownership and dark history. His quest led him to an obscure collector of paranormal artifacts, an elderly woman who spoke in riddles but possessed knowledge that pierced the veil. She warned Marcus, the Leica's power was ancient, born from grief and the human need to hold on to fleeting moments. To destroy it outright would risk unraveling the fragile balance between worlds, but to use it was to invite the gaze of forces that thrived on despair and fear. Marcus faced a harrowing choice: embrace his role as a keeper of lost souls or find a way to sever the Leica's curse, knowing that either path could consume him entirely. As the shadows deepened and the camera's silent watch continued, Marcus steeled himself for the battle to reclaim his life and free the countless spirits caught in the eternal frame. Under the flickering light of a dusty attic, Marcus met the collector, an enigmatic woman named Evelyn. Her eyes, sharp and knowing, seemed to hold the weight of countless untold stories. She welcomed him not with warmth, but with a solemn caution. "The Leica," she whispered, "is no ordinary camera. It was forged in sorrow, designed to capture not just images, but souls. Each shutter click traps a fragment of the subject's essence, a moment suspended between life and death." Marcus listened, heart pounding as she revealed the camera's dark history. It had passed through the hands of artists, mourners, and witnesses, all touched by tragedy. Some had tried to destroy it, none had succeeded. The camera always returned, waiting, patient. Evelyn handed Marcus an ancient tome, its pages yellowed and fragile. "This holds the ritual," she said. "A way to release the trapped souls and break the curse. But it demands sacrifice, the sacrifice of one who holds the Leica's power." Marcus's breath caught. To free the souls, he must risk becoming part of the collection himself. The choice loomed: salvation or damnation. With trembling hands, Marcus prepared for the ritual, knowing this night would change everything. Marcus Reed's nights at Willowbrook Cemetery became a slow unraveling of the ordinary. The stillness, once a comfort, turned into a living presence, a shifting silence that crept among the headstones like a spectral tide. The older sections, with their blackened marble and moss-covered inscriptions, seemed to pulse with memories and secrets that defied time. At 2:30 a.m., crossing through Section G, the place where unease first took root, Marcus felt a tightening in his chest. The cold night air pressed heavier here, and the flashlight beam trembled in his grip. The gravestones looked unchanged, yet something unseen had altered the space between them. On impulse, Marcus pulled out his phone and snapped photos, frozen moments of stone and shadow. The images revealed nothing unusual, but a growing compulsion told him to keep the evidence close. Over the weeks, this creeping dread followed him like a second shadow. Sections D, H, and K each carried their own weight, pockets of energy that twisted the familiar into something uncanny. Marcus found his breaths shallow, his pulse quickened, and the steady rhythm of his patrols disrupted by moments when the silence thickened, almost suffocating. At times, faint sounds teased the edges of hearing, whispers carried on the cold wind, footsteps echoing on the cracked paths when no one was there. Shadows flickered just beyond sight, dancing where the light failed to reach. Yet it wasn't fear that gripped Marcus most, it was the unshakable sense that the dead did not rest, that they rearranged, shifting the invisible furniture of the afterlife to unsettle the living. He began to wonder what forces moved among the graves, what stories lingered in those forgotten corners, and whether he was being watched by eyes unseen but ever present. The night air grew colder as Marcus pressed deeper into Willowbrook Cemetery's ancient sections. His flashlight beam flickered over weathered stones, some cracked and tilted as if shifted by unseen hands. The silence was no longer empty, it carried weight, memories folded into the earth. On one patrol, near a particularly old cluster of graves marked only by worn, moss-covered slabs, Marcus caught a glimpse of movement at the periphery of his vision. A shadow, too fluid and quick to be a trick of light, darted between the stones. He spun around, heart pounding, but found nothing but the chill wind whispering through bare branches. The feeling of being watched grew unbearable. Whispers, faint and fragmented, teased his hearing, indistinct voices calling names he didn't recognize, sometimes his own. Footsteps echoed behind him, soft and deliberate, though the paths remained empty. One night, as Marcus paused near a statue of an angel with cracked wings, the ground beneath him seemed to shift. The earth trembled subtly, as if the cemetery itself breathed and rearranged its inhabitants. The silence thickened until it felt like a physical force pressing down. He shone his light toward a distant row of graves and saw them, faint outlines of figures, standing still yet impossibly numerous. Their faces were pale and gaunt, eyes hollow but somehow searching. Some clutched faded photographs, others held worn letters and tattered keepsakes. They moved not with menace but with an urgent longing. Marcus realized then that the dead were not gone. They lingered, rearranging their eternal rest, reaching out across the veil to remind the living that memory and loss never truly fade. As dawn approached, he felt a whisper brush his ear, almost a breath, carrying a name lost to time. The cemetery's secrets had begun to unravel, and Marcus was caught in the middle of their restless stirrings. Marcus's breakthrough came quietly, during his 7th week on the graveyard shift at Willowbrook Cemetery. As he sifted through the photographs he'd painstakingly taken, his blood ran cold. The headstone of Mrs. Eleanor Hartwell, a modest granite marker dating back to 1923, had unmistakably shifted, moved nearly 3 inches to the northeast from its prior resting place just 5 days earlier. His hands trembled as he cross-referenced more images. Thomas McKenna's Grand Victorian Monument had slid 4 inches southwest, while Sarah Chen's simple stone had creeped 2 inches due north. The movements were subtle enough to dismiss as camera angle quirks or ground settling, but the pattern was undeniable once he began paying attention. Determined, Marcus armed himself with a measuring tape, notebook, and camera. Night after night, he crawled between graves, methodically mapping the positions of every stone in the affected sections. The work was grueling, crawling over cold earth, recording distances from immovable markers, documenting every slight shift with exacting precision. What he uncovered made his throat tighten and sweat bead cold on his palms. Over 2 weeks, 37 headstones had moved, not randomly, but deliberately. Each shift was a small but consistent repositioning, always in specific directions that formed angular patterns when plotted on paper. Slowly, these shapes began to take form, symbols resembling an ancient alphabet Marcus didn't recognize. As more stones moved, the patterns grew clearer and more complex. His days blurred into obsession. Even off duty, he researched endlessly, soil science, cemetery maintenance, and folklore, desperate for any rational explanation. But geology and natural causes could not account for the precision or the repeated, intentional nature of the movements. When his supervisor commented on his unusually thorough inspections, Marcus deflected with vague references to settling ground. But privately, he was consumed. The cemetery no longer felt silent or still, it felt alive, charged with an unsettling energy. During his 10th week, a terrifying discovery chilled him to the core. The angular symbols corresponded exactly to diagrams found in ancient grimoires and occult manuscripts. One pattern of 7 headstones in Section D perfectly matched a threshold marker described in a Romanian monastery's medieval text, a focal point said to be a gateway between worlds. Reading the translated Latin sent a shiver down his spine. This marker was no mere superstition, it was a door. The cemetery's silence thickened, now pregnant with dreadful possibilities. Marcus began carrying a digital recorder on his rounds, capturing not just images but sounds. When reviewing the audio, he discovered a low-frequency hum, a subtle vibration he had never consciously noticed, growing strongest near the shifting stones and symbols. The dead were not resting. They were rearranging. And Marcus was caught in the center of their awakening. Under the pale glow of his flashlight, Marcus stood at the heart of Section D, where the 7 headstones formed the eerie threshold symbol. The low-frequency hum from his recorder pulsed softly, vibrating through the soles of his boots like a warning whispered from beneath the earth itself. He took a deep breath, steadying his nerves. This was no longer a place of rest, it was a crossroads, a fragile boundary where the living and the dead intertwined. Marcus began to research ancient rites, old folklore, anything that might explain how to close or control the gateway the symbols represented. Hours turned into days as he pored over dusty tomes, translated forgotten languages, and connected with scholars who studied occult and paranormal phenomena. Guided by newfound knowledge, he crafted a plan to perform a ritual at the threshold marker designed to seal the portal and calm the restless spirits. The ritual demanded precision, a circle of salt, sacred herbs, and ancient incantations spoken aloud under the moonlight. The night of the ritual arrived. Marcus felt the weight of countless eyes upon him as he laid salt carefully around the headstones, arranged bundles of herbs, and whispered the incantations, his voice steady despite the rising tension in the air. As the final words left his lips, the ground trembled, and the air thickened with an otherworldly energy. Shadows coalesced into forms, ghostly figures who hovered near the stones, their faces a mixture of sorrow and relief. A sudden gust extinguished the candles, plunging Marcus into darkness. When the light returned, the hum had faded, replaced by a profound silence that felt like release. Marcus knew the balance had shifted. The gateway was sealed, for now. But as dawn broke, he realized this was only a reprieve. The forces at Willowbrook were ancient and patient. The dead would always rearrange, and Marcus would always be their reluctant guardian. Days turned into weeks, and Marcus found himself tethered to Willowbrook Cemetery in ways he hadn't anticipated. The eerie silence that once oppressed him had lifted, but a new weight settled upon his shoulders, the responsibility of guardian to a place where the veil between worlds thinned dangerously. His nights were no longer routine patrols, they became watchful vigils. Marcus documented every subtle shift, a moved stone, a flicker of shadow, a whispered voice caught on his recorder. The cemetery had become a living entity, breathing secrets through cracked marble and aged earth. Visitors who dared wander after dark reported unsettling encounters, fleeting figures glimpsed between trees, cold spots that clung to the skin, and the sensation of unseen eyes tracking their every move. Marcus knew these were echoes of the restless, spirits who longed for peace but remained caught in the liminal space. To maintain the fragile balance, Marcus refined his rituals, salt circles, protective wards, offerings of sage and cedar. He built a small shrine near the threshold marker in Section D, a beacon of light in the cemetery's growing shadows. Yet, despite his efforts, the dead's movements continued, subtle but insistent, a reminder that the boundary was porous. Sometimes, late at night, Marcus glimpsed figures silently rearranging headstones, their mournful gazes locked on him, as if questioning his role in their eternal unrest. He often wondered how long he could stand watch before the weight of the cemetery consumed him entirely. But Marcus remained, a sentinel caught between life and death, committed to guarding Willowbrook's secrets, knowing that some doors, once opened, never fully close. Marcus felt the heavy shadow of inevitability closing in as the symbols at Willowbrook Cemetery took shape with alarming speed. In Section K, 6 headstones had aligned themselves into what ancient texts described as a viewing aperture, an arcane window allowing glimpses across dimensional boundaries. Section H bore the mark of a summoning focus, its purpose unknown yet undeniably ominous. The signs were clear: the cemetery was no longer just a resting place for the dead, it was awakening as a colossal machine designed to breach the veil between worlds. Marcus's health deteriorated. His appetite vanished, every meal tasted like dry cardboard. His reflection in the security office mirror revealed hollowed cheeks and dark circles, the visage of a man tethered to the dead. Over 12 relentless weeks, he lost 15 pounds, weighed down not just by the physical toll but the crushing knowledge of what was unfolding beneath the moonlight. The final night arrived with a surreal clarity. Standing amidst the 7 completed geometric formations spread across the ancient sections, Marcus was struck by visions unlike any dream, awakening moments experienced wide-eyed during his patrols. Aerial views of the cemetery, underground perspectives, and glimpses into centuries past played out like spectral projections. He witnessed the cemetery's birth in 1847, workers positioning the first headstones under the watchful gaze of a man in a long black coat consulting a leather-bound tome. The placement of each stone was deliberate, a cryptic design encoded in granite, intended to converge only after generations of patient migration. The revelation nearly knocked Marcus to his knees. Willowbrook was not merely a burial ground, it was a vast, slow-operating device engineered to open doorways between realities. As dawn painted the eastern headstones in pale gold, Marcus documented every detail: photographs, sketches, audio recordings, capturing the eerie energy that thickened the air. Shadows cast by the stones bent light unnaturally, darkening to shapes and forms that defied earthly origin. With a heavy heart, Marcus submitted his resignation, sensing the fragile balance had shifted irrevocably. His supervisor's indifferent reaction, casual mentions of past guards leaving abruptly, only deepened his unease. Returning to a mundane life proved impossible. The humdrum of a shopping mall job could not erase the lingering dread or the sensation that elsewhere, other cemeteries might be awakening, their stones creeping inexorably toward unknown configurations. Marcus never reported his findings. Who would believe the slow, patient assembly of symbols meant to tear open reality's fabric? More dangerously, what if belief alone was enough to hasten the unthinkable? Some doors, once opened, never close. Some knowledge spreads like a contagion, infectious, relentless, and unforgiving. The days after Marcus's resignation were haunted by an unshakable sense of watching eyes and whispered warnings. Though miles from Willowbrook Cemetery, its shadow lingered in every quiet moment and dark corner of his life. Late at night, his dreams carried him back to the ancient grounds, visions of shifting stones and restless spirits locked in silent ritual. He saw flickers of movement in peripheral shadows, as if the veil between worlds had thinned, allowing glimpses of things better left unseen. Reports began surfacing in nearby towns, unexplained disappearances, odd weather patterns localized around cemeteries, strange lights flickering in the dead of night. Marcus feared the slow awakening he witnessed at Willowbrook was not isolated, but a creeping contagion spreading across burial grounds far beyond his knowledge. Driven by dread and responsibility, Marcus attempted to warn authorities, researchers, even local clergy. His warnings met disbelief or dismissal. Few could fathom the notion of grave markers rearranging themselves with geometric precision, let alone serving as gateways between dimensions. Isolated, Marcus found himself drawn into a clandestine network of occult researchers and paranormal investigators. Through encrypted channels and whispered contacts, he learned that burial grounds worldwide were stirring, sites where the fabric of reality weakened under ancient designs. The consequences of these breaches were subtle yet insidious: shadows that moved independently, whispers that invaded dreams, and in some cases, beings slipping through the veil, entities neither alive nor dead, hungering for footholds in the mortal world. Marcus realized the cemetery's slow transformation was a warning bell, and a beginning. The veil had thinned. The boundary was breaking. And somewhere beyond, in the shifting dark, something was waiting. Marcus found himself drawn deeper into a shadowy world few dared to acknowledge. The occult network, an uneasy alliance of scholars, mystics, and investigators, became his lifeline. Through encrypted forums and whispered meetings in dimly lit rooms, he exchanged fragmented knowledge and harrowing experiences with others who had witnessed the thinning veil. Together, they pieced together a chilling picture. Ancient geomantic designs, like those forming at Willowbrook, were catalysts, awakening dormant pathways between dimensions. These thin places had always existed, but human interference and neglect had allowed their influence to grow unchecked. Marcus's role became clear: to monitor these sites, document their changes, and, when possible, perform rites to reinforce the boundaries. But these rituals were fraught with danger. Each attempt risked drawing attention from entities lurking just beyond perception. One night, the network alerted Marcus to unusual activity at another site mirroring Willowbrook's patterns. Coordinating remotely, they guided Marcus through a complex sealing ritual, invoking ancient words and symbols to close the aperture forming there. The air shimmered, shadows recoiled, and for a moment, the breach seemed sealed. But Marcus knew it was temporary. The forces beyond the veil were patient and persistent, waiting for cracks to widen, for gates to weaken. As the boundary thinned, he felt their gaze, cold, curious, and hungry. Marcus's fight had only just begun. Marcus's breath caught as he stared at the thermal imaging screen. Behind the drywall, a perfect mirror of his apartment glowed faintly, a shadowed twin, warm and alive, echoing his every move with a delay that chilled him to the bone. In 37 years, and 15 as an architect, he had trusted blueprints as absolute truth. But here, in apartment 4B of the Meridian building, that trust was shattered. The missing doorway on the eastern wall wasn't a mistake. It was a barrier, an invisible threshold between two parallel spaces, layered atop one another but never meant to touch. Days passed in a haze of anxiety and obsession. Marcus tested the wall relentlessly, knocking in patterns, listening for replies, watching the thermal feed for shifting silhouettes. Each echo from the other side matched him perfectly, delayed by hours as if time itself bent between these twin spaces. He began leaving objects, books, cups, pressed lightly against the wall, only to find their outlines faintly imprinted on the drywall, a spectral residue of the unseen apartment. Sleep was a stranger. Nights were haunted by whispered breaths, footsteps pacing just beyond hearing, and the cold that seemed to seep from that dividing wall like a living thing. One evening, as a storm raged outside, Marcus pressed his ear once more to the wall. This time, the knocking came before he raised his hand, 3 slow raps, urgent and deliberate. His heart thundered. Someone, or something, was trying to communicate, waiting for him on the other side of a door that didn't exist. Marcus's mind raced as the storm's thunder echoed faintly through the building. The knocking, so precise and insistent, shattered the fragile boundary between reason and the impossible. Whoever, or whatever, was on the other side wasn't just mimicking, it was reaching out, trying to make contact. Armed with a sense of both dread and determination, Marcus began to experiment. He arranged a series of knocks, rhythmic and complex, hoping to establish a form of conversation. Hours slipped away as he tapped and listened, each exchange echoing through the silence like a secret code whispered between worlds. Then, one night, something changed. The knocks were followed by a soft thud, a faint scraping sound. Marcus pressed his hand against the wall and felt a subtle vibration, a heartbeat in the drywall itself. Slowly, impossibly, the surface of the wall rippled like water disturbed by a stone. His breath caught. The wall was alive. Gathering every tool he had, thermal camera, stud finder, acoustic sensors, he mapped the shifting wall as it pulsed, revealing outlines of doors and windows that didn't belong to his apartment but to that spectral twin beyond. Desperate for answers, Marcus searched through old building records, unearthing long-lost plans that hinted at abandoned construction phases, apartments started but never finished, sealed off, erased from all official documents. The other side, it seemed, was a phantom space, an echo of the Meridian building layered invisibly over reality, inhabited by something, or someone, trapped between. As the nights deepened, Marcus felt the presence grow stronger, no longer content with knocking. Shadows danced just beyond his vision, and whispered voices curled through the thin wall, murmuring promises and warnings he could barely comprehend. The boundary was weakening. And soon, Marcus realized, it might not hold much longer. Summoning every ounce of courage, Marcus decided he had to cross the threshold, the invisible boundary that separated his reality from the shadowed twin beyond the drywall. Equipped with his tools and a resolve forged from fear and curiosity, he began searching for any weak point, any seam where the barrier might be penetrated. Late one stormy night, as rain hammered against the windows and thunder rumbled in the distance, Marcus noticed a faint vibration in the wall, synchronized perfectly with his heartbeat. Placing his palm flat, he whispered, "I'm coming through." Using a crowbar and a hammer, he began carefully dismantling a section of the eastern wall, the drywall crumbling away to reveal cold, ancient bricks behind. With every strike, the air grew colder, heavier, thick with the scent of damp earth and forgotten time. Finally, he breached the barrier, stepping into a narrow, dimly lit corridor that mirrored the layout of his own apartment complex, yet faded and worn as if lost in a forgotten past. The corridor's walls whispered secrets in unintelligible murmurs. Faint, flickering lights cast eerie shadows, and the air thrummed with an unsettling energy. As Marcus moved forward, he encountered objects frozen in time, a rusted bicycle propped against a wall, faded wallpaper peeling like old memories, and doors leading to empty rooms where silence reigned. Then, from the shadows, a figure emerged. Not fully solid, yet unmistakably human, she looked at Marcus with eyes filled with sorrow and longing. "I've been waiting," she said softly, voice echoing like a distant wind. Marcus realized with a shudder that she was the other tenant, trapped between worlds, confined within this spectral apartment that shouldn't exist. Their fates intertwined, Marcus understood that his journey into the hidden realm was only beginning, and the mysteries beyond the wall held secrets that could unravel everything he believed. Marcus felt the crushing weight of impossibility settle deep in his bones. The heat signatures behind the wall, the phantom apartment, were always hours ahead, like a distorted preview of his own life playing in reverse. The unsettling sensation of being watched, mimicked, and anticipated gnawed at his sanity. Every night became a sinister echo chamber. When he rose at 3 a.m., he heard the faint footsteps of his spectral self completing the same path he had yet to take. Morning coffee at 7 a.m. was preceded by the sounds of preparation on the other side hours earlier. The rustling of sheets, the creaking floorboards, even his unique, restless pillow fluffing echoed from beyond the wall, always offset by 4 hours. His frantic note-taking barely kept pace with his spiraling dread. The phantom occupant moved with uncanny precision, mirroring every deliberate action Marcus planned to take. Moving a chair at 8 p.m. He heard the scraping at 4 p.m. cooking dinner at 6:30. The clatter of pots and pans began at 2:30. This wasn't mere mimicry. It was pre-living. The invisible script dictated his life from behind the drywall. Sleep fled, replaced by dark circles and an appetite that turned to ash. Even water tasted metallic, alien. The breaking point came in a moment both surreal and terrifying. Marcus heard his own voice, muffled but unmistakable, reciting words he had yet to utter. His pen dropped, trembling fingers unable to hold it. 4 hours later, compelled beyond reason, he spoke aloud the exact phrases, as if reading from a script written by his shadow. Desperation drove Marcus to rebel, to shatter predictability. Yet, the phantom's self anticipated every twist, reflecting his chaotic attempts with perfect delay. Even defiance was prescripted. The wall became no mere partition but a living membrane, warm, pulsing beneath his touch, paint rippling like liquid. Peripheral shadows flickered, vanishing whenever he dared look directly. Reality frayed. Marcus stood trapped in a waking nightmare, his life lived twice, once in real time, once as a ghostly prelude behind a silent, breathing wall. Marcus felt the weight of paranoia pressing down like the thin mountain air itself. Shadows fell at impossible angles in his apartment, twisting reality until even familiar hallways seemed alien. The building's other tenants, once strangers, now wore faces of quiet conspiracy. Their glances were loaded with unspoken knowledge, their greetings laced with veiled warnings. His work suffered beneath the oppressive fog of dread. Concentration dissolved as every waking moment was consumed by the relentless analysis of sounds from behind the wall, the footsteps, the whispers, the eerie mimicry of his own life, shifted by hours. His boss's concerned words drifted through a haze of fear and fatigue, distant and faint against the storm raging inside Marcus's mind. Then came the terrifying breakthrough. Marcus realized he could influence the phantom activities. By carefully planning and executing specific actions, he orchestrated responses from the other side. His own future played out as a symphony conducted by a shadowy self trapped beyond. One night, trembling yet resolute, Marcus armed himself with tools, hammer, crowbar, utility knife, and approached the wall. The hammer rose, ready to tear open the secret dimension that had stolen his agency. But just as his hammer struck, silence swallowed the space. The absence of sound was suffocating. And then, a sound shattered the stillness. The unmistakable clang of a hammer dropping, echoed back at him precisely in sync. Horror seized him. The sounds were no longer foretelling the future, they were his past, replayed by another version of himself trapped before he had even moved in. Marcus was not the echo, he was now the reverberation, living hours behind a shadow self that led the dance. The wall was not a barrier, it was a mirror, reflecting moments of the same life fractured in time. Marcus stood, breathless and defeated, knowing the cycle was eternal. The hammer lay at his feet, waiting for the moment he would pick it up again to relive the same revelation. The apartment darkened, the wall watching silently, its terrible secret locked in endless repetition. High above, at 11,000 feet, Marcus Webb sat alone in the mountain radio station. The air was thin, the silence deeper than anywhere else, broken only by the groaning walls and the crackling of frequencies lost to most of the world. Marcus's heart thundered in his chest, each beat echoing the impossible words streaming through the speakers. The smooth, confident voice from decades past had just named him, the lone technician in the mountain station, monitoring frequencies that shouldn't yet exist. His rational mind grasped for explanation, but none could reconcile the surreal reality pressing down on him. Radio waves didn't travel through time. They couldn't. Yet here was proof, broadcast clear and alive, as if the past and present were folded into a single, impossible moment. The music swelled again, bright brass and swinging rhythms that both comforted and unnerved, while the announcer resumed with the familiar cadence of a man unaware he spoke to a future not yet come. Each segment was a snapshot from another era, yet laced with cryptic references that seemed tailored specifically for Marcus, minor details only someone intimately familiar with the mountain station's history would know. As the night deepened, the broadcast's tone shifted. The announcer's friendly chatter gave way to an urgent, almost pleading message. He spoke of warnings, of rifts in time and space weakening near the mountain peak, of unseen forces probing the fragile boundaries. He urged vigilance, speaking in coded phrases that felt like keys to a puzzle Marcus had only begun to understand. The transmission faded as dawn approached, leaving Marcus alone with the hum of his equipment and the chilling knowledge that the mountain's silence was anything but empty. He was no longer merely a watcher. He was a guardian caught between eras, tasked with listening to echoes from the past to protect a future precariously balanced on the edge of the impossible. Marcus's breath hitched as the announcer spoke with unnerving intimacy, describing details no stranger could possibly know. The coffee stain, the flickering fluorescent light, the broken cabinet hinge, all mundane, overlooked quirks of his solitary station, were now broadcast live through a voice from the past, yet with perfect, eerie precision. Sweat trickled cold down Marcus's spine despite the mountain chill. His heart pounded as the announcer narrated every small motion, his trembling hands, the metallic crash of his chair against the wall, the hesitation in his breath. When Marcus reached instinctively for the volume knob, the voice preempted his movement, calling out his intention before it fully formed in his mind. His pulse accelerated, the crushing realization dawning: this transmission was not just a broadcast. It was a connection, a bridge between 2 points in time, monitoring and echoing his very existence. The announcer then began reciting the history of the station itself, the engineers who built it, the machinery replaced, the upgrades planned for the future, details no living historian could possess. It was as if the voice was tethered beyond time, watching not just Marcus's present, but all moments connected to this isolated outpost. Marcus's gaze fell to his equipment manual, where a worn photograph of his ex-wife and daughter rested, tucked between pages of technical diagrams. The voice referenced the exact page, speculating with haunting insight why Marcus kept it hidden, a secret refuge amid the cold, mechanical reality. The control room seemed to close in around him, walls shrinking beneath the weight of impossible knowledge. Shadows twisted independently, reflections warped to show versions of himself stricken with growing dread. Marcus sat frozen, caught in a web woven across decades, a living ghost in the machine, trapped between past and present, caught in the broadcast of his own life. Driven by a mixture of dread and determination, Marcus plunged into research, scouring every archive, every technical manual, every fragment of history about the mountain station. He sought the origins of the mysterious broadcast and the identity of the voice that so chillingly narrated his life. Night after night, he replayed the recording, dissecting each word, each inflection, hunting for clues hidden beneath the polished veneer of the announcer's professionalism. His investigation led him to long-forgotten radio logs from the 1970s, brittle paper records stored in a dusty municipal archive miles from the mountain. The logs spoke of an enigmatic engineer named Henry Caldwell, who had mysteriously vanished shortly after overseeing a crucial upgrade to the transmission system. Caldwell's disappearance had been officially ruled a tragic accident, but whispers among old technicians suggested something far more unsettling. Marcus unearthed a faded photograph of Caldwell, a man whose stern eyes seemed to pierce through time itself. The resemblance between Caldwell and the voice on the broadcast was unmistakable. One evening, as the station hummed quietly in the pre-dawn hours, Marcus set up an array of sensitive receivers and directional antennas, hoping to trace the source of the transmission beyond the expected signal range. Hours passed in tense silence until a faint flicker appeared on the spectral analyzer, an anomalous frequency emanating from deep within the mountain itself. Heart pounding, Marcus followed the signal, descending into a hidden maintenance shaft he had only recently discovered in the station's basement. The narrow tunnel was lined with corroded cables and old equipment, a forgotten artery feeding the station's enigmatic heart. At the tunnel's end, he found a sealed door, marked with cryptic symbols matching those from the transmission's coded warnings. Behind it lay a small, dust-choked chamber housing an archaic console, its dials and switches frozen in a state between decades past and present. As Marcus reached out to touch the console, the room seemed to breathe, the air thickening with unseen presence. The speaker crackled to life, and the familiar voice of Henry Caldwell whispered from the static, "You've come too far, Marcus." Some transmissions were never meant to be heard. In that moment, Marcus understood, Caldwell was no mere engineer but a guardian trapped in time, bound to maintain the fragile balance between worlds. The broadcast was both a warning and a tether, an echo of Caldwell's own struggle to hold back forces that threatened to unravel reality. Marcus faced a choice: turn back and let the silence fall again, or step forward into the unknown, risking his own fate to uncover the truth and confront the restless echoes lurking within the mountain. The air in the chamber thickened, charged with an energy that seemed to pulse in time with Marcus's racing heartbeat. The archaic console before him flickered faintly, as if awakening from a long slumber. Dust motes danced in the weak beam of his flashlight, swirling like restless spirits disturbed by his presence. Marcus's fingers trembled as he reached toward the ancient switches, hesitation clawing at his resolve. The voice of Henry Caldwell echoed once more from the crackling speaker, laden with both warning and weary hope. "You've crossed the threshold few dare approach. Beyond this point lies the fault line between worlds, a rift held fragile by old vows and unspoken pacts." A cold chill swept through the chamber as unseen forces seemed to press against the walls, eager to seep through the thinning veil. Marcus understood then that this was no ordinary station, it was a guardian post, a temporal sentinel built to monitor and contain anomalies threatening the fabric of reality itself. Gathering his courage, Marcus flipped the largest switch. The console hummed to life, ancient lights blinking in rapid sequence as monitors flickered with streams of cryptic data and shifting dimensional maps. The speaker crackled urgently. The balance falters. The echoes grow restless. Your presence may tip the scales. Suddenly, the chamber quaked, the ground beneath him trembling as spectral shadows flickered at the edges of his vision. The voice of Caldwell faded, replaced by an overwhelming silence filled with unseen watchful eyes. Marcus knew that confronting this breach meant more than survival, it meant holding the fragile line against forces beyond comprehension. Steeling himself, he stepped deeper into the room's shadows, ready to face whatever waited beyond the veil. Marcus sat frozen, the weight of the announcer's revelations pressing down like a suffocating fog. His mind struggled to grasp the paradox unfolding before him. Time was not a linear path but a layered tapestry, where past, present, and future coexisted, overlapping and intersecting in ways that defied reason. He was both observer and participant in an endless loop, a temporal echo reverberating across decades. The radio waves, untethered from normal constraints by rare cosmic alignments, had transformed the mountain station into a nexus of parallel realities. His own voice, the voice of the announcer, was broadcast backward and forward through time, creating a recursive dialogue between versions of himself separated by 50 years yet intimately connected. The amber lights on the control panel no longer signaled mere machinery, they glowed like beacons, calling out across the boundaries of existence to his counterparts in alternate presence. The coffee stain, the worn manual, even the faint hum of the fluorescent light, these were markers in a reality fracturing and converging simultaneously. As the announcer's voice faded into distant static, Marcus felt the oppressive stillness of the control room deepen. The air seemed heavier, charged with the knowledge that this event was not unique but destined to repeat every 50 years, trapping versions of himself in an eternal dance of signal and response. He was caught between timelines, a solitary guardian forced to witness his own life unfold in overlapping layers, never fully free, always bound by a destiny written across parallel worlds. The transmission ceased, leaving Marcus alone with the glowing amber lights and the haunting certainty that the next convergence, the next impossible night, awaited him in another half-century. Marcus sank into his chair, the hum of the equipment fading into the background as his mind spiraled through the labyrinth of time and fate he found himself trapped within. The notion of a cyclical existence, his life endlessly looping across 50-year intervals, was both a cosmic curse and a bewildering revelation. How could he break free from a narrative seemingly scripted across parallel realities, where past and future collided, and where every action was both cause and consequence? Was he doomed to endlessly replay the same night, a phantom tethered to a signal only he could hear? Yet beneath the weight of despair, a fragile ember of hope flickered. If time was layered, if the loops were reflections, then perhaps awareness, his consciousness, could be the key. To endure was one thing, to awaken within the cycle was another. He wondered if the very act of understanding his place in this cosmic dance was a step toward breaking its chains. Could he disrupt the pattern by acting unpredictably, by choosing differently from his counterparts? Or might the transmission itself be a warning, a beacon calling for intervention to prevent a greater unraveling? Marcus's gaze fell on the amber lights blinking steadily, like heartbeat pulses against the shadowed room. They were both prison bars and guiding stars, reminders of his connection across time, and perhaps, a path to transcendence. The mountain's silence pressed in around him, but inside his mind, a storm of possibilities raged. Was he a prisoner of fate, or its reluctant architect? Could he endure the loop, mastering its rhythm? Or would he find a way to shatter the cycle and step beyond the boundaries of layered time? As dawn crept over the peaks outside, Marcus resolved to confront the unknown with every ounce of courage he possessed. To seek not only survival but understanding, and maybe, just maybe, liberation. Marcus's pulse pounded as he stepped cautiously onto the pristine platform, a surreal time capsule concealed beneath the city's bones. The tiles gleamed unnaturally bright, their glossy surface untouched by decades of dust or footsteps. The vintage advertisements flickered faintly in his flashlight's beam, reminders of an era long past, frozen in this forgotten subterranean realm. The silence was thick, oppressive, broken only by the slow drip of water echoing distantly through the tunnels. Marcus raised his radio again, desperation rising in his throat, but only the eerie static greeted him. That static, alive, breathing, whispering, seemed to pulse in rhythm with his own heartbeat, as if the very air around him was tuned to a frequency beyond human comprehension. His mind raced, trying to reconcile the impossible. How could a station platform exist here, outside any known maps or plans? Was this a forgotten remnant of the city's past, or a gateway to something else entirely? A portal hidden in plain sight, bridging moments in time or dimensions unseen. As Marcus moved forward, the tiles beneath his feet felt less solid, almost liquid, rippling faintly like a disturbed pool. Shadows shifted at the edges of his vision, flickering with unnatural speed, vanishing when he tried to focus on them directly. Then, from the darkness beyond the platform, a faint melody began, a haunting, spectral tune that seemed woven from the city's memory itself. It grew steadily, echoing through the tunnels, calling to him with both sorrow and warning. Marcus realized then that the tunnels were not just passageways but veins of a deeper, ancient consciousness. They held secrets layered with time, echoes of lives long ended, moments never meant to surface, and forces watching patiently beneath the surface of the familiar world. The platform was a threshold, a hinge in the fabric of reality, waiting for the right moment, or the right person, to cross. Marcus took a deep breath, the chill of the underground air filling his lungs as he stepped further onto the platform. Each footfall echoed unnaturally, the sound bouncing off the tiled walls and dissolving into a haunting silence that seemed to hold its breath. The faint melody grew louder, a spectral hymn threading through the cold air, drawing him deeper into the station's ghostly embrace. His flashlight beam swept across the walls, revealing more vintage advertisements, faded yet vivid, each promising comforts and joys from a time long vanished. There was a peculiar clarity to the scene, as if time itself had slowed here, trapping the space in a loop where the past lingered endlessly. Marcus's eyes caught movement near a far alcove, shadows flickering just beyond reach. He squinted, heart quickening. Was it a trick of the light, or something else alive beneath the surface? He edged closer, the rhythmic drip of water now mingling with faint whispers barely audible to the ear, like voices lost in the corridors of memory. Near the alcove, he found a rusted metal door slightly ajar, its hinges groaning as if protesting his intrusion. He hesitated, a wave of dread crashing over him, but the insatiable need to understand propelled him forward. Pushing the door open, he stepped into a dim chamber filled with archaic equipment, gauges, levers, and panels etched with symbols he didn't recognize. The room hummed with latent energy, a palpable force that seemed to throb in the very walls. Among the relics, Marcus discovered a worn leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age. Opening it, he found detailed entries, notes from someone who had monitored this hidden station decades ago, documenting strange transmissions, temporal anomalies, and inexplicable events that defied logic. As he read, a chilling realization settled over him: this was no mere abandoned platform. It was a nexus point, an intersection of time and space where realities bled into one another, and where the city's unseen histories converged. Suddenly, the chamber's temperature plummeted, breath frosting in the air. The whispers swelled into a chorus, surrounding Marcus, voices layered with sorrow, warning, and something older, an ancient patience waiting for release. He understood then that he was not just an intruder, but a participant in a long-forgotten covenant. The platform was alive, its secrets yearning to be heard, its mysteries ready to unfold. Marcus's heart thundered in his chest as he stared at the silent passengers, a knot of dread tightening in his stomach. The eerie stillness was suffocating, broken only by the faint hiss of the train's smooth motion. The air grew colder, the biting chill seeping into his bones like an unseen frost. He rose slowly from his seat, each movement measured, careful not to startle whatever ancient presence lurked in the shadows. The passengers remained statuesque, their blank gazes fixed ahead, as if locked in time or caught in some spectral trance. Summoning every ounce of courage, Marcus took tentative steps toward the nearest figure, the man in the fedora. The fabric of the coat was impossibly smooth under his fingertips, cold and dry, yet vibrant in color as if freshly pressed. He reached out to touch the brim of the hat, but before his hand made contact, the figure's head snapped sharply toward him. The face beneath was pale and gaunt, eyes hollow but shimmering with an unearthly light. No breath, no pulse, yet those eyes held a depth of sorrow that pierced Marcus's soul. The figure's lips parted, and a whisper floated into the car's stale air, words lost to time, fragments of a language long forgotten, but laden with meaning. Marcus staggered back, heart racing wildly. The train car seemed to tilt, reality bending around him as shadows lengthened and the haunting melody from the station platform echoed faintly in his ears. Suddenly, the glass windows darkened completely, turning his reflection into a pale ghost staring back. The advertisements flickered and twisted, revealing glimpses of places and moments Marcus could barely comprehend, cities that never existed, faces that belonged to no one alive. A cold voice, distant yet intimate, spoke through the static of the radio. "Welcome, traveler, to the passage between worlds. Here, time and memory converge, and the lost ride eternal rails." The train began to slow, the hypnotic motion giving way to stillness. Ahead, the tunnel walls peeled away into endless blackness, an abyss beyond mortal sight. Marcus realized then that this journey was no ordinary passage through underground tracks. It was a voyage through liminal spaces, realms where forgotten souls waited and ancient mysteries stirred. He was trapped between moments, a witness to the eternal ride, caught on rails that led nowhere, and everywhere. Marcus's breath caught in his throat as the train accelerated into the endless tunnel once more. The endless cycle had begun again, but he was no longer the terrified man who had first boarded. A strange calm settled within him, though the chill in his bones remained. He studied the doppelganger before him, himself, trapped in that eerie repetition. The puppet-like motions, the vacant stare, the dawning horror as the impossible became reality. Marcus realized he was witnessing his past self, replaying the nightmare he had just endured. Yet, within Marcus stirred a burgeoning awareness, this was more than a loop of despair. The subtle shift inside him hinted at a crack, a fissure in the cycle. The very act of observing his double, of bearing witness to the pattern, was beginning to loosen the grip of this temporal prison. Outside the window, the shadowy platforms continued to multiply, watching eyes never blinking, waiting for their turn. But Marcus felt something else now, a faint pull, a whisper in the depths of his mind, urging him to seek the hidden mechanism that controlled this spectral railway. He reached into his pocket, fingers brushing against a small, cold object he hadn't noticed before, a rusted key, ornate and oddly warm despite the train's cold interior. His heart surged with cautious hope. Could this key unlock the doors to freedom? Or was it another part of the trap? As the train glided forward through impossible tunnels and spectral stations, Marcus steeled himself to face whatever awaited. Somewhere beyond the endless tracks lay the answer, the secret of the phantom train, the fate of the lost passengers, and perhaps, a chance to break the cycle. Marcus's uneasy calm gave way to a surge of alertness. The thought of the idol's precise movements, the silent rotation in the dead of night without any physical disturbance, gnawed at the edges of his seasoned skepticism. It was a silent whisper of a truth beyond the tangible, a subtle violation of the natural order that he could neither dismiss nor fully comprehend. David Kellerman, curator and guardian of history, felt the heavy weight of unseen forces pressing against the walls of the museum's sanctity. The Mesopotamian fertility idol, crude and ancient, had become a silent messenger, its rotations like a code written in shadows, hinting at the presence of something watching, waiting, orchestrating from the darkness. He set his tape measure down slowly, his mind racing through legends and myths of artifacts cursed to move, haunted by spirits tied to forgotten rituals and powers beyond mortal grasp. Yet, none of the academic texts or security logs offered an explanation. The museum was a fortress of logic and preservation, but here, on these quiet nights, the past refused to stay buried. David's eyes flicked to the obsidian ceremonial knife, the idol's new silent gaze fixed upon it as if to convey a message only the stone could understand. The connection felt alive, as if these relics from lost civilizations were locked in a dialogue invisible to human senses, their movements a cryptic dance across the span of millennia. His hands trembled again, not from fear but from the thrill of the profound mystery unfolding in the heart of the museum. For all his years among relics, this was a revelation that blurred the line between history and the uncanny, a reminder that some secrets refused to remain silent. David's rational mind recoiled in disbelief, but his eyes refused to look away. The idol's rotation was no longer a simple shift, it was deliberate, hypnotic, almost ritualistic, an ancient dance performed in the silence of a darkened museum, far removed from the bustle of modern life. As the minutes ticked by, the idol's face seemed to realign, its gaze gradually fixing toward the obsidian ceremonial knife. The faint glow that had earlier hinted at a pulse deepened, shadows stretching longer, merging into shapes that teased the edge of David's vision. He felt the air grow heavier, as if the museum itself had become a vessel for something timeless and unknowable. The slow movement of the artifact was a message written not in words, but in time, an echo of forgotten rites, an unspoken invocation that demanded patience to comprehend. His heart pounded with a blend of awe and terror. The museum, once a sanctuary of knowledge and preservation, was revealing a secret, that some histories were alive, that some relics still bore the weight of the spirits who shaped them, moving not with human hands, but with the subtle rhythms of something eternal. David raised his phone to capture the unfolding enigma, knowing that no recording could truly capture the full depth of what he was witnessing. Still, this fragile evidence was his tether to reality in a world that was suddenly so much larger, and far more mysterious, than he had ever imagined. David's nights grew restless, his days a haze of exhaustion and obsession. The slow rotations of the artifacts became a nightly ritual he dared not miss. Each subtle movement seemed to breathe life into the museum's silent halls, as if the relics were quietly awakening from centuries-long slumber. He pored over ancient texts and obscure archives, searching for clues that might explain the strange phenomenon. His research led him to forgotten rituals of cyclical time and sacred geometry, beliefs that some objects were vessels of power, designed to act as portals or guardians between worlds. One night, while cross-referencing the patterns traced by the artifact's movements, David realized they formed a complex mandala, an intricate map etched in time and space. The rotation of each piece wasn't random but choreographed to align precisely with celestial cycles and hidden energies beneath the museum itself. As he sat beneath dim lights, surrounded by fragile tomes, a new understanding dawned. The museum wasn't just a repository of history, it was a living threshold, a nexus where past, present, and spirit converged. The artifacts were active participants, anchoring unseen forces that both protected and threatened the fragile veil between worlds. Haunted by this realization, David sensed unseen eyes watching him, a presence just beyond perception. Shadows flickered at the edge of his vision, whispers curling like smoke through the air. The museum's silence was no longer empty, it was pregnant with anticipation. On a stormy evening, the rotation of the fertility idol accelerated, its slow dance quickening to a pace both mesmerizing and terrifying. David felt the air shift, thick with energy that raised the hairs on his arms and sent a chill deep into his bones. The boundaries between time and space blurred as the ancient energies surged, and David understood that his quest had awakened something dormant. He was no longer a mere observer but a participant in a story that transcended centuries, a story of power, sacrifice, and the enduring mysteries that dwell just beyond the reach of light. Everything had changed. The museum felt alive in a way I never could have imagined. The artifacts no longer seemed like silent relics but like sentinels guarding secrets too vast and ancient for me to comprehend. Their new positions created a map, a cosmic choreography that linked distant cultures and epochs into a single, unfathomable design. I felt like a trespasser stumbling onto a ritual that stretched across time itself. Sleep remained elusive. Night after night, I found myself drawn back to the museum, compelled to watch as the artifacts performed their slow dance once again. The lights dimmed, the air thickened, and shadows lengthened into shapes that teased the edges of my vision. Every movement felt weighted with meaning, a language written in geometry and silence. I began to sense a presence behind the scenes, something vast, patient, and indifferent. It was the abyss itself, the eternal watcher, using these ancient objects as its voice and hands. It was as if the museum was a living altar, and I, unwillingly, had become its witness and perhaps its guardian. My hands trembled whenever I thought of touching the artifacts. I knew now that they were more than objects. They were thresholds, gateways, relics of a cosmic truth that our minds were not meant to hold. I understood, deep in my bones, that to interfere was to risk unraveling not just history, but the very fabric of reality. And yet, despite the fear and the growing weight of the unknown, a small part of me hungered for understanding. I was caught between dread and awe, suspended in a fragile space where human curiosity meets the unfathomable. I don't know what the future holds, nor whether the ritual will continue indefinitely, but I know this: the museum is no longer a place of quiet study. It is a threshold between worlds, where ancient forces rearrange themselves in slow, deliberate movements. And I am forever changed, a silent guardian of secrets older than time. The mansion's silence felt heavier here, like the absence of light had allowed something else to fill the space, something ancient, patient, watching. As I moved cautiously beneath the chandelier, I noticed the air had thickened, each breath tasting faintly metallic, tinged with an undercurrent of something electric yet utterly unnatural. I started my inspection with the wiring panel in the library, lifting the heavy iron door to reveal a tangled web of cables and fuses that should have been straightforward. But the circuits defied logic. Wires seemed to disappear into shadows that swallowed their ends, connections shimmered with faint iridescence, and the breakers hummed with a subtle vibration that resonated deep in my bones. While tracing the main lines, the shadows shifted again, longer, darker, moving against the light's pull. The bust on its pedestal seemed alive in the flickering candlelight Mrs. Hartwell had lit when the power failed, its marble eyes gleaming with a secret awareness. I caught myself frozen, heart pounding, feeling those painted and carved eyes weighing down on me, as if they held the memory of centuries and judged every breath I took. Then a chill wrapped around my spine as a whisper, so soft I thought it was the wind, brushed past my ear. Words half heard, ancient and cryptic, threading into my mind like smoke. I could not place the language, though it stirred a deep primal recognition, as though the house itself was speaking in a voice older than time. Mrs. Hartwell's story poured out between her nervous glances. The mansion's electrical anomalies had only begun with the shadows, but now there were noises too. Soft footsteps echoing in empty corridors, doors creaking open without wind, and at night, a faint blue glow beneath the floorboards of the library. The house was restless, alive with a power that no circuit breaker could contain. It seemed to breathe, to watch, to rearrange its own existence beneath layers of dust and forgotten time. And I, caught between wires and shadows, was becoming part of its slow awakening. As the afternoon deepened into dusk, I felt the walls pulse with a steady heartbeat, as if the mansion was awakening from centuries of slumber to perform its own patient ritual, a dance of light and shadow, power and silence, a slow unfolding of ancient secrets that would not be denied. I realized then that this was no ordinary electrical failure. The mansion was a temple built not just of stone and timber, but of mystery and memory. The power flickered once more, and in that unstable light, I glimpsed the terrible grace of something eternal stirring within these walls, a force moving slowly, patiently, rewriting the very nature of this place and all who dared enter. As night fell and the mansion settled into an uneasy silence, I returned to the library, drawn by a mixture of dread and curiosity I could no longer resist. The flickering candlelight was now replaced by a pale, unnatural glow that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves, bathing the room in a spectral light that made the ancient tomes shimmer with an otherworldly sheen. I carefully approached the grand fireplace, where the shadows pooled darkest. There, etched faintly into the stone hearth, was a series of symbols, spirals and angular shapes intertwined in a pattern that felt both foreign and deeply familiar, like a language spoken in dreams. My fingers traced the carvings, cold as the stone beneath, and the air around me thickened, pressing inward as if the house exhaled slowly, alive with secrets. Suddenly, the temperature plunged further. A whisper, clear yet indecipherable, brushed against my ear, carrying the weight of centuries. I spun around, but the room was empty. The bookshelves seemed to breathe, the leather-bound volumes shifting imperceptibly, their pages fluttering like the wings of trapped birds. I realized then that the mansion was a nexus, a place where the veils between worlds thinned, where time folded back on itself, and the echoes of forgotten rituals lingered like a haunting melody. Mrs. Hartwell's power failures were but symptoms of something far more profound, a stirring beneath the foundations, a slow reawakening of ancient forces bound to the very bones of this house. With trembling hands, I took out my phone and began recording. The shadows lengthened unnaturally, crawling along the walls in slow, deliberate patterns. The chandelier above cast fractured reflections, multiplying the shadows into a swarm of silent watchers. My heart pounded as the whispering grew louder, forming words I could almost grasp but not fully understand. Then, through the dim haze, a figure appeared, vague at first, like smoke caught in a shaft of moonlight, then more defined, a woman in Victorian dress, her eyes hollow yet piercing, standing silently near the window, watching. I wanted to speak, to ask who she was, what she wanted, but my voice was caught in my throat. She lifted a translucent hand, beckoning with a slow, deliberate motion. I felt the weight of her gaze, sorrowful and ancient, a plea from beyond time itself. The mansion had awoken its guardians. And I was no longer just an electrician, I was a witness to its living memory, caught in the fragile space where past and present entwined. The shadows whispered their secrets, and I knew the night was only beginning. The rational part of my mind insisted this was impossible, that stress and poor lighting were playing tricks on my perception. But my trembling hands and the icy chill creeping up my arms whispered a far darker truth. This shadow was not a mere absence of light, it was a presence, a tangible fissure between worlds, a fracture in reality itself. I stepped back from the wall, heart pounding so violently I feared it might burst through my ribs. The room seemed to pulse around me, the flickering shadows converging and retreating in a silent rhythm that mocked every breath I drew. The library's oppressive stillness was shattered only by the faintest rustling, like silk sliding over ancient stone. Then, the shadows stirred once more, coalescing near the hearth. A form emerged slowly from the darkness, shifting between solid and insubstantial, like smoke caught in a draught. The figure's eyes, twin orbs of dim light, fixed on me with a weight that crushed my soul. I knew then, without question, that this mansion held not just memories or whispers, but something far older and far more sentient. In that instant, I felt the full weight of centuries pressing down, an ancient ritual unfolding around me, performed by shadows that had existed long before the house was built. The electrical failures, the impossible angles, the breath in the cold air, all signs of a living edifice, a temple to forces beyond human reckoning. The figure raised a hand, translucent, yet undeniably real, beckoning me toward the darkness beyond the hearth. My instincts screamed for flight, yet my feet moved forward, drawn by a pull I could neither resist nor understand. The library's shadows deepened, folding over themselves like waves, pulling me into a world where time bent, and the veil between the living and the forgotten was thin as breath. I was no longer just an electrician fixing wires. I was a witness, a participant, caught in the mansion's eternal dance between light and shadow, past and present, life and the unknown. The blueprints shouldn't have existed. That was my first thought when I pulled the yellowed papers from the filing cabinet in the theater's basement office. My flashlight beam cut through decades of dust and neglect, illuminating architectural drawings that no one alive seemed to know about. The lines were precise, the measurements detailed, but the most disturbing part was the date, 1923. Nearly 30 years before the theater itself was said to have been constructed. As I spread the fragile pages across the cracked wooden table, a creeping unease settled over me. The drawings depicted a labyrinth beneath the theater, a network of hidden rooms and passageways far more extensive than any basement should contain. Most alarming was a central chamber labeled simply, the Convergence. Its purpose was left vague, annotated with cryptic symbols that looked more like occult markings than architectural notes. I shivered despite the stale air. Something about those blueprints whispered of secrets long buried, rituals performed in shadowed halls, gatherings that transcended time and reason. The theater, a place of performance and illusion, had been built atop something far more real and far more terrifying. I had come here to investigate odd reports, faint whispers heard during late-night rehearsals, actors who spoke of unseen presences, flickering lights that defied explanation. Now, holding these blueprints, I realized the theater itself was a stage for something ancient and unseen, a nexus where worlds brushed together in silence. The thought gnawed at me: what had been performed in the convergence? What shadows still lingered in the catacombs below, waiting for the next act in a play older than humanity? As I tucked the fragile plans back into my bag, a distant sound echoed through the basement, a slow, deliberate tapping, like fingers drumming on a hollow door. I froze, knowing that some secrets refused to stay buried, and some curtains must never rise. The more I studied them, the more disturbed I became. Blackwood's notes in the margins were cryptic, sketches of impossible shapes, annotations about folds in reality, and thresholds beyond perception. One passage, underlined twice in dark ink, read, "The theater is a vessel, a conduit where the walls breathe between worlds." I shivered, closing the fragile blueprint with deliberate care, feeling a chill that had little to do with the draft sneaking through cracked windows. That night, as the empty theater creaked and sighed beneath the weight of its own history, I found myself drawn back to the shadowed corridors. Alone, the rhythmic applause began again, soft at first, like distant echoes, then swelling into an overwhelming storm of sound. I pressed my ear to the heavy velvet curtain framing the stage and heard whispers, faint and indecipherable, as if countless voices from ages past were conversing just beyond the veil of hearing. My flashlight beam caught movement, a flicker of shadows dancing across the balcony. Heart pounding, I ascended the creaking stairs, drawn toward the source. The shadows coalesced into vague forms, spectral figures dressed in fashions from long-gone eras, their faces obscured, yet their presence undeniable. The theater wasn't abandoned. It was alive with memories, with echoes of performances that transcended time. I realized then that Edmund Blackwood hadn't just designed a building. He had created a liminal space, a nexus where the past and present entwined, where reality folded back on itself. The theater was not just a stage for performers but a threshold for something far older and deeper. The next morning, I gathered the crew and shared what I'd seen. Some laughed it off, exhausted and eager for daylight, but others looked uneasy, their eyes darting toward shadowed corners. We agreed to redouble our efforts, to map every hidden passage, every anomaly, but deep down, I knew some parts of the theater were beyond maps or measurements. That night, I returned to the blueprints one last time. The margins held a final note, almost illegible, scrawled with urgency: "Beware the curtain that never falls, the performance never ends." Outside, the wind howled through the broken panes, and somewhere inside, the unseen audience waited patiently for the next act. The building was quiet. Work officially concluded, yet the air felt thick, charged with a weight that pressed against my chest. As I stepped into the empty lobby, the familiar echoes of footsteps long past seemed to resonate just beneath the surface of silence. The walls themselves seemed to breathe, exhaling the history of countless performances and forgotten lives. I made my way to the auditorium one last time, flashlight cutting through the shadows that gathered like old memories. The red velvet seat stretched before me, rows upon rows waiting for an audience that might never return. The stage was dark, yet I could almost feel the lingering presence of performers frozen in their final act. Then, as I approached the orchestra pit, the air shifted. A cold breeze whispered through the room, carrying with it the faintest sound of applause, delicate and distant but unmistakably real. I froze, heart pounding. The translucent figures reappeared, seated quietly, watching, waiting. Suddenly, the heavy curtain across the stage twitched, as if stirred by an unseen hand. The applause swelled, echoing through the chamber like a wave crashing against the walls. My breath caught in my throat as the auditorium transformed, a spectral performance playing out in the twilight between worlds. I realized then that Edmund Blackwood's masterpiece was not just a building but a liminal space, a crossroads where time, memory, and reality folded and intertwined. The theater was alive, its architecture a vessel for those lost in the folds of history and dimension. As the final echo of applause faded, I stepped back, the weight of what I'd witnessed settling deep within me. The theater would never be silent. It would never be still. And neither would I. The day of the ribbon cutting arrived with a crispness in the air that made the crowd's excitement almost tangible. I stood at the back of the theater, watching as people streamed inside, their faces lit with eager anticipation. The air hummed with the mingling of hope, nostalgia, and an unspoken curiosity that transcended generations. The mayor's speech was polished and triumphant, celebrating the restoration of a beloved landmark. Cameras flashed as the ribbon was cut, and applause echoed through the vast halls. But beneath the surface of celebration, I felt a tremor of unease, a whisper of the price paid for resurrecting this place in its true form. As the first performance began, the lights dimmed, and the audience hushed. Yet, I noticed something strange, the faces in the crowd seemed to flicker. Some attendees blurred at the edges, their features shifting between sharp clarity and a ghostly haze. The actors on stage moved with an almost unnatural grace, their voices carrying with an eerie perfection that transcended human capability. The performance unfolded not just as a play but as a ritual, a dance between worlds where reality bent and time folded back on itself. Every scene, every line, seemed charged with the weight of unfinished stories and unspoken longings. The audience was no longer just watching, they were participating, tethered to the space in ways beyond comprehension. Later that night, alone in the darkened theater, I wandered through the corridors and halls that now thrummed with latent energy. The impossible geometries Blackwood had designed seemed to pulse with life, the walls whispering secrets only the dead and the forgotten could understand. I realized that the theater was no longer merely a building but a living conduit, a bridge between the realms of the living and the dead, between what was and what might be. The price of my decision weighed heavily. By restoring Blackwood's vision, I had opened a gateway, inviting all those lingering souls into this endless intermission. The theater would never be silent again. The audience would never truly leave. And neither would I. The journal's entries continued with unnerving specificity, outlining events with the cold certainty of a ledger rather than the uncertain brushstrokes of prophecy. Each entry was dated, timed, and described in minute detail, as though the author had already witnessed every moment. My hands trembled as I flipped through the pages, the weight of the book growing heavier with every passing line. The library around me seemed to hold its breath. The silence wasn't just absence of sound, it was presence, a thick, waiting stillness that pressed against my skin. I tried to reason it away. Perhaps a prank, a clever forgery meant to unsettle the night staff. But the precision, the consistency, the sheer volume of information made that impossible. And then, the most horrifying truth settled over me like a shroud, the journal was still being written. I found fresh entries appearing each night, as I worked my shift. Notes about events that had not yet come to pass, about people whose lives had yet to change, recorded in a hand that was not my own but was unmistakably fluent and practiced. The script seemed to shift subtly, as if adapting itself to the unfolding future. The whispers began soon after. At first, they were faint murmurs carried on the drafts between the stacks, indistinct voices speaking in languages that felt ancient yet oddly familiar. They came from nowhere and everywhere, echoing through the labyrinth of books like a choir of forgotten souls. Some nights, I would catch phrases, half-remembered verses from poetry, snippets of old folktales, warnings in tongue twisted by time. The words felt like keys, unlocking memories I never had, pulling at the threads of my mind. One particularly frigid night, as the clock ticked toward 2 a.m., the temperature dropped suddenly, my breath turning to mist before me. The pages of the journal fluttered open on their own to a fresh entry, and the whispers swelled into a chorus, filling the aisles with voices not quite human, not quite other. In the depths of that night, I glimpsed shadows moving between the shelves, figures neither fully formed nor entirely absent. They were the lost stories, the forgotten histories trapped in the margins of time and memory. They sought release, understanding, an audience for their unspoken tales. I realized then that the Whitmore Public Library was not merely a repository of knowledge but a nexus, a crossing point where the past, present, and future blurred, where the boundaries between stories and reality frayed. And I, its keeper in the dead hours, had become the reluctant witness to a library alive with secrets, a place where history was still being written, rewritten, and whispered to those who dared to listen. The word hung in the air, sharp and heavy like a blade suspended just above my heart. Choose. What choice? Between what and what? I felt the cold breath of inevitability brush against my neck, as if the library itself was breathing through me, demanding a response. My mind raced through possibilities, but none made sense. The translucent figure in the reflection, the other librarian, was not just a ghost or a shadow of the past. He was me. Or rather, a version of me caught in some loop, some echo across time and space, trapped in the very shelves where history and fate collided. I turned back to the journal, hoping for answers, but the pages were blank. The scripts, the prophecies, all disappeared as if wiped clean by some unseen hand. Yet the silence that followed was deafening, filled with the whispers of those lost stories and futures yet to unfold. That night, the library seemed less like a place of knowledge and more like a threshold, a liminal space where time folded upon itself and choice became a prison. I understood then, I was being asked to decide whether to continue witnessing the fate of others, to remain the keeper of futures and pasts intertwined, or to close the book forever, stepping away from a responsibility too vast for one man to bear. But what cost would abandonment bring? Would the stories be lost, the futures unguarded, the unseen eyes watch even closer? I sat alone amid the shifting shadows and restless pages, feeling the weight of countless eyes and untold tales pressing upon my soul. In that deep quiet, I realized some choices are not really choices, they are calls to awaken, to accept the unseen burdens, and to walk the delicate path between knowing and forgetting. And so I chose, to stay, to watch, to listen, because some stories are never meant to end, and some voices will only be heard by those brave enough to hear their silent echoes. The sea whispered secrets older than time, and the lighthouse stood as both sentinel and witness. I sent my own reply, a sequence of flashes that matched the ancient rhythm. The darkness answered again, but this time with a slow, pulsing glow that seemed to ripple across the water like a living thing. Nights passed, and the ghostly vessel reappeared, always at twilight, always vanishing with the morning mist. It sailed no course charted on any map, and no other living soul claimed to see it. The logbook entries multiplied, written in my hand but recounting events I had no memory of witnessing. One night, the light flickered out mid-rotation, and I found myself staring into an ocean that seemed endless yet contained something vast just beneath the surface, a realm where reality thinned and shadows breathed. The galleon was not a ship but a beacon itself, a signal from a time and place outside our world, calling to those who listen, those who stand guard on thresholds between past and present, life and death, the known and the unknowable. I realized then that my lighthouse was not merely a guide for wayward sailors but a gatekeeper for ancient currents that flow beyond the horizon of human understanding. And so, I stand watch, caught between tides and time, between light and shadow, waiting for the next message carried on the waves, a summons from the depths that only those who have seen beyond can heed. The weight of those words pressed down on me like the heaviest fog rolling in from the sea. Temporal gateway coordinates. Dimensional barriers. These weren't mere nautical terms or sailors' superstitions, they were the language of impossible passage, of thresholds between worlds. I found myself grasping the meaning with a blend of awe and creeping dread. The lighthouse was no longer just a guide for ships, it was a guardian of those fragile edges where time folded, where past and present collided and overlapped. That day, I could barely eat or speak. Every shadow in the room seemed to pulse with secret knowledge. The logs kept writing themselves, entries I had no memory of recording, capturing ships and souls traversing paths beyond human comprehension. As twilight fell again, I prepared to face whatever was coming next. The air grew thick with salt and electricity, my hands steady despite the storm inside me. This was no longer just my duty, it was my fate. And so, I waited at the beacon, standing watch over the horizon that both lied and told the truth, knowing that with each turn of the light, I was guiding more than ships, I was shepherding travelers through the vast, uncharted seas of time itself. I am its sentinel. A guardian standing watch over the fragile thresholds where history folds upon itself, where past and future meet in silent communion. With each rotation of the beacon's light, I reach out across the currents of time, beckoning lost souls toward safe passage, offering them a flicker of hope in an ocean of uncertainty. I am no longer alone. The lineage of keepers before me lingers in whispered echoes, their hands guiding mine through the intricate dance of temporal tides. And though the weight of this responsibility presses heavily upon my shoulders, there is a profound peace in knowing I serve a purpose beyond mortal reckoning. For on this island, where horizons deceive and light becomes a bridge, I stand, not merely to illuminate the sea, but to illuminate the unseen pathways between worlds, guarding the passage for those who sail the tides of eternity. The ghostly images writhed beneath the surface of the oil and canvas, shifting subtly as I moved the ultraviolet lamp across the portraits. What had seemed like serene, stoic faces now bore the unmistakable marks of anguish and despair. The figures in the second layer seemed trapped, prisoners embedded within the paint, their twisted forms clawing at the bounds of their painted prisons. A cold shiver traveled down my spine. This was no mere artistic technique or restoration artifact. The portraits were living prisons, holding within them fragments of something far darker than any history book could explain. I tried to rationalize. Perhaps it was a trick of the ultraviolet light interacting with centuries-old varnishes, or some chemical reaction that distorted the images. But deep in my bones, I knew this was something else, something supernatural and ancient. That night, I could not sleep. The silence of my apartment was shattered by the echo of those painted eyes, watching, waiting. Dreams of shadowy hands reaching from darkened canvases haunted my restless hours. I woke each time feeling the gaze of unseen watchers lingering in the corners of the room. On my next visit to the estate, I noticed changes. The shadows between the portraits deepened, growing more distinct. The air grew heavier, charged with a presence that tightened my chest and made breathing laborious. The portrait's eyes seemed to follow me more insistently, their ghostly layers flickering with a dreadful life of their own. One evening, as twilight bled into the mansion's cold halls, a soft whisper brushed past my ear, a voice not heard but felt, speaking a language older than the house itself. The whispers seemed to emanate from the paintings, carrying secrets meant to remain buried beneath layers of oil and time. I realized then the true horror of the Whitmore estate and its cursed collection. The eyes were windows, not merely watching, but guarding. The portraits held vigil over ancient spirits, tormented souls bound by unfinished business and dark pacts made long ago. And by disturbing their resting place, I had awakened them. Fear coiled within me like a living thing. I was no longer the caretaker of art, I was a witness to a lingering curse, caught between the realms of the living and the painted dead. The question that haunted me above all was whether I could escape their gaze or if I had become part of their eternal tableau, forever watched by those eyes that never truly closed. Each entry was eerily detailed, recounting moments I hadn't yet lived, the discovery of the portrait's hidden layers, the strange sensations in the attic, even the subtle changes in the paintings themselves. It was as if the journal belonged not to a past restorer, but to a future version of myself trapped in some endless cycle. The more I read, the heavier the atmosphere became. The air thickened as if the house was drawing breath, watching, waiting. My hands trembled uncontrollably, and the shadows around me deepened and warped, reaching towards the corners of the room like dark fingers. That night, sleep was a distant memory. The attic grew colder, the silence filled with soft murmurs barely audible over my pounding heart. I kept glancing at the unfinished portrait. The eyes seemed to gleam with a life of their own, watching, judging, inviting me to join whatever fate awaited. By dawn, the portrait was complete, every detail rendered with haunting precision. My hands now held a delicate quill, poised above the open journal. The writing wasn't just a record anymore. It was a summons. I realized then the true horror: this was not mere restoration. I was becoming part of the painting, part of the house's dark legacy. The Whitmore estate was no longer just a home to forgotten art, it was a prison for souls who dared to witness its truth. As I stood frozen before the canvas, a cold voice whispered through the shadows, "Welcome home, Edwin." Beneath the flickering glow of the attic's spectral light, Edwin felt himself dissolve into the timeless tapestry woven by those painted souls. Each brushstroke he laid was no longer just pigment on canvas, it was a binding thread in an eternal narrative, stitching him into the gallery of those forever caught between worlds. His own presence became a delicate dance between observer and participant, tethered to the haunted past even as he shaped the future of the collection. The attic was no longer merely a physical place but a threshold, a liminal space where time folded and spirits lingered, where the line between life and art blurred until indistinguishable. Outside, the world continued in its ignorant haste, unaware of the quiet eternity thriving in the Whitmore estate's shadowed heights. Inside, the portraits watched, waiting, as they always had, for the next to join their chorus, the next to see beyond the veil and willingly surrender to the silent music of the paintings. And so, with a steady hand and a heart both heavy and free, Edwin began his masterpiece, not of oil and canvas, but of fate and whispered secrets, the next keeper of the haunted gallery where the eyes never ceased their watchful gaze.